the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 251, Sophia's Choice. Standing on the winter dock, Sophia watched with great interest the several fishing boats moored there, rising and falling with the wind and waves. Then, she turned her gaze to the military dock some distance away. Compared to the nearby fishing boats, the Skyfire transformed cruiser was undoubtedly more conspicuous. The Winter River is so vast. She was looking at the boats, but she was talking about the river. Where does this river lead to? Follow the river west and it will eventually flow into the sea. This leads to the sea. The Kingdom of Tiran was a landlocked country with no coastline. After the founding of Winter City, the Winter River led to the Western Sea, becoming Tiran's only access to the sea. David hadn't reported this information, and even His Majesty the King was unaware that his country now had access to the sea. Now that he had told Sophia about this, perhaps King Abelson would soon learn of the news as well. As David was thinking this, Sophia suddenly turned and looked at him. "What, do you need me to keep it a secret? You mean High Cow?" "Yes," Sophia nodded vigorously. "I can keep it secret." David looked at the young princess, suddenly eager to know her true feelings. Why didn't she refuse the marriage? And it looked like she had made up her mind to marry him. He'd expected Sophia to be embarrassed by the direct question, but the princess paused for a moment before delivering an irrefutable response. "If I don't marry you, I'll marry someone else. By then, I don't know if I can still stay in Tiran, as a princess of Tiran." This was Sophia's inevitable fate. Her marriage wasn't simply a marriage, it was complicated by countless other factors. Comparing all the circumstances, marrying David was a very good choice for Sophia. She had met David and had some feelings for him. David, young, handsome, strong, and capable, was undoubtedly superior to a stranger she had never met and whose personality she had no idea of. Besides, marrying David would allow her to remain in Tiran. If, for some reason, she were to be relocated abroad, she might never be able to return home. Even more terrifying, marrying abroad would require her to constantly maintain the dignity of a Tiran princess, forever unable to freely do what she wanted or enjoyed. Such a life was horrible. Even knowing her fate and her mission, she wouldn't choose such a future. Listening to Sophia's description, David found her reasoning quite compelling. He would have made the same choice if faced with a similar situation. He took Sophia on another tour of the military docks, even climbing onto the deck of a Skyfire transformed cruiser to feel the strong north wind blowing down the river. Closing her eyes for a moment, Sophia suddenly removed the necklace from her neck. Then, she felt the realities of winter in Winter City, especially during its blustery days. "It's so cold." David moved swiftly, raising his hand and releasing a beam of holy light to protect the princess. He then took the necklace from Sophia's hand and placed it back around her neck. Sophia, still looking down at the golden light lingering around her, asked, "What is this? Holy light, holy light?" "Yes, it's a magical power." After replacing the necklace that maintained warmth on Sophia, David briefly explained the holy light to her, also mentioning the Cathedral of Light and the Church of Light. Sounds similar to the temple, the difference is quite significant. The deities worshipped in the temple are named, but the teachings of the Church of Light are not like that, and the holy light is not a distinct entity. As they chatted, the sun gradually set, and night gradually enveloped Winter City. Because it was winter, the sun set early, and it was already dark, but it was not yet dinner time. However, a princess couldn't afford to remain out in the pitch-black darkness, even on a date with her fiancé. So, despite her many curiosity, she still rode the iron back to the upscale accommodations of the Winter Hotel. "There are so many fascinating things here. I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow's tour. There will be even more exciting things tomorrow. Your Highness, please rest well and recharge." Tomorrow's tour wasn't just for Princess Sophia. Earl Sutton Stewart was also an important guest. The main location of the visit was the Winter Barracks. While this would reveal a lot of information, it was also an opportunity to demonstrate strength. After bidding farewell to Princess Sophia, David returned to his office at Castle Glamorgan and discussed tomorrow's plans with Elias, the ceremonial officer, Gareth Stanton, the commander of the Winter Knights, and Floyd, the deputy commander. Furthermore, Lasserbeak stood on David's desk. Laserbeak represented the Decepticons, now renamed the Legion of Cybertron. Laserbeak would broadcast meetings for Soundwave and Megatron, allowing Megatron to discuss matters with David through Laserbeak. Unfortunately, even though the Decepticons had joined Winterfell, Fort Glamorgan's interior was designed with human-scale architecture in mind when it was first constructed, not with the possibility of holding meetings with Cybertronians. However, Megatron and Optimus Prime were rumored to have decided to establish a Cybertron Technology Research Center within the Cybertronian living quarters. Their first research project would be to further develop Cybertronian compression technology. The goal was to enable Cybertronians to maintain a similar human size for extended periods without compromising combat or transformation efficiency. Cybertronian compression technology could shrink them to human size, but this compression would have various side effects, such as prolonged transformation time. They had previously refrained from researching this technology because it wasn't necessary. Now, Megatron felt the need to further enhance his compression technology. He didn't want to rely on Laserbeak to broadcast every meeting. Tomorrow's tour route is basically set, starting with farmland and residential areas, followed by garbage, the wastewater treatment plant, the power plant, the waterworks, and finally the military camp. Elias planned the itinerary, taking into account route, time, and lunch arrangements. If all goes well, we'll arrive at the military camp by noon. After a quick lunch, we'll begin our tour of the various areas within, viewing the various weaponry and equipment, and some of the combat capabilities on display. Elias finished explaining the process, and the two commanders were now on duty. Sir, when displaying the Winter Knight's combat capabilities, shouldn't we be appropriately reserved? Although Gareth Stanton had been appointed by King Abelson to serve as David's personal knight, he had always firmly pledged his loyalty to Earl David of Glamorgan, his true sovereign. Therefore, at this moment, he considered David's interests solely, not those of the king or the Kingdom of Tiran. No, there's no need. David waved his hand, indicating that the demonstration would proceed normally. Even if Lord Stewart learned of the Winter Knight's actual combat capabilities, by the time he returned to the capital to report, that information would already be outdated. The Winter Knights have long been on the fast track, especially since Tony Stark, a tech-savvy hacker, officially arrived in Winterfell. The Winter Knights' equipment has been constantly upgraded. Currently, the Winter Knights are generally equipped with a test version of the Blizzard Power Armor, which will be used in tomorrow's demonstration. In fact, the official version of the Blizzard Power Armor has been finalized, and several sets have been produced for testing. Over the next period of time, the Winter Knights will gradually upgrade to the official version of the Blizzard Power Armor. In addition to more advanced internal systems and facilities, the official version of the Blizzard Power Armor also boasts significantly improved combat capabilities, Cybertron energy shielding, greater mobility and power amplification, a more powerful shock absorption system, and more. This is also coupled with the next-generation rifle, tentatively codenamed Flute, which is still under testing. As for why it's called a flute, it's because David had previously named Winterfell's standard pistol piano, so Tony simply chose a musical instrument as the code name for the new rifle. With a plethora of new weapons awaiting deployment, and the Winter Knights already undergoing Paladin training, their combat capabilities will soon surge. Therefore, there's no need to conceal the information currently available. As for the truly hidden details, such as combat methods and new tactics, those also needn't be kept secret. During the previous battle at Snowforest, many Ironforest soldiers witnessed how Winterfell fought, and he doubted the capital wouldn't have access to this information. Furthermore, if he deliberately presented the Winterfell army tomorrow with a stark difference from the Snowforest battle, it would only spark further suspicion. At a time when the Kingdom of Tiran is preparing to forcibly relocate its population northward, igniting suspicion is not a wise move. After David briefly explained his plan, the others knew what to do tomorrow: continue training as usual and present the intended display. Presumably, after Winter City had demonstrated sufficient combat prowess, the capital wouldn't continue its insistence on deploying troops to the northern plains. What should we do? Laserbeak, who had remained silent, spoke up, voicing Megatron's voice. The Cybertron Legion was also considered part of the Winter Legion, but how should they demonstrate their capabilities tomorrow? Have Nitro Zeus perform a flight demonstration, demonstrating the effectiveness of the ground attack. Chapter 252 Tilan Shadow Guard. My name is Ulysses, and I'm a Royal Guard Knight of the Kingdom of Tiran. But that's just my facade. My true identity is a member of the Tiran Shadow Guard. The Tiran Shadow Guard is an organization utterly loyal to His Majesty the King, operating in the shadows. They are the key to the stability and strength of the Kingdom of Tiran. My becoming a Tiran Shadow Guard wasn't accidental. From the time I was old enough to understand, they raised and educated me. Becoming a member of the Tiran Shadow Guard was my destiny. And I couldn't be happier. After years of study and training, I became a full-fledged Shadow Guard, earning the guise of a Royal Guard Knight. My primary responsibility is to ensure that His Majesty is immediately aware of any signs of misconduct within the Knight's Guard. This mission was incredibly boring. I felt like all my years of training and study had given me no real opportunity to utilize them. But I persevered, diligently completing the tasks assigned to me by my superiors, until a more important one arrived. That day, I reported back as usual. Everything is going well with the Knight's Guard. This time, I wasn't greeted with a usual simple response, but a new mission. Great! The important mission I'd waited so long for was finally here. I was eagerly anticipating the mission. Following the code I'd learned, I eagerly retrieved the mission details and related materials from a secret place, then hurried home. During this time, I had to find excuses to decline invitations from my fellow Knights Guardians and the enthusiastic greetings from my neighbors. After taking precautions, I entered the secret room and opened the enchanted materials. After reviewing the mission, I realized it didn't seem too difficult. It simply involved leveraging my status as a Knight Guardian to join the mission led by Earl Sutton Stewart. Earl Sutton Stewart, of course, was well known in the capital. It was said that the number of beautiful women he had slept with stretched from the Tiran capital to the shores of the Satarunma Empire. He was truly an enviable figure. However, as the current queen's younger brother, Earl Stewart wouldn't face any trouble as long as he slept with ordinary women, avoiding any potential harm to the Tiran kingdom. My mission wasn't to investigate this Earl, but to accompany the delegation to Winter City, nestled in the northern plains, and thoroughly research all intelligence on Winter City. Winter City, Baron Glamorgan. Oh, now an Earl. He's incredibly lucky. Some even call him the luckiest man since the birth of the Kingdom of Tiran. Now, this lucky Earl has been favored by Lady Luck again, with His Majesty the King planning to marry the beautiful Princess Sophia to him. Damn! How enviable! For a moment, I wished I were the Earl of Glamorgan. But first, I'd better examine the other information. Along with the mission instructions, I was given data gathered through various channels by the Kingdom and the Tiran Shadow Guards. This information was intended to provide me with a basic understanding of Winter City. Having received relevant training, I knew clearly that this information came with another task: verification. Is the actual situation in Winter City as described in the records? How accurate is it? What are the differences? How significant are the discrepancies? I need to investigate all of this. It looks like a challenging mission, and I'm starting to look forward to it. Joining the mission won't be a big deal for me. My superiors have already prepared me for it, and I don't need to act special. I just need to perform my duties as a Knight Guard, serving as a guard beside the princess or the Earl. The journey wasn't anything to worry about, except that as we approached the northern plains, the weather grew increasingly cold. Even with my thick battle robe and cloak, the icy wind was still unbearable. I really want some of the warm accessories the princess wears. We've arrived at the northern plains. What a hell of a place. The wind is even more unbearable than before. Besides being like a knife, it seems to blow in from all directions. Even though I've plugged every crevices in my armor with cotton, I still feel the wind blowing through it. Is this now fort? What a simple fortress. Orcs can't even take it down, so it doesn't seem worth paying much attention to. I was wrong. The inside of Snow Fort is so beautiful. So clean? I feel like the main road to Snow Fort is even cleaner than the palace in Tiran. Did the Earl of Glamorgan have it cleaned specifically for the princess's arrival? Those heavily armored winter knights and those giant metal golems, the winter knights, once thought to be a joke, seem to be more than just a royal lord's self-entertainment as everyone imagined. Anyway, the house in Snow Fort is warm, supposedly thanks to the heating. I feel like I've been reborn. It's so comfortable here. I've had a rare good night's sleep since joining the mission. This truck isn't very comfortable, but it's incredibly fast. Looking at the other royal guards on board, everyone marvels at its speed. They think if soldiers could ride in this kind of vehicle, they could reach the battlefield faster and more easily, leaving more energy for dealing with the enemy. I agreed, realizing that with these vehicles, Winter City could control a much larger territory with fewer troops. Arriving in Winter City, I finally saw the so-called Winter City. Recalling the records, Winter Town is just a small town still under construction, with incomplete infrastructure and only a few wooden houses. Although Baron Glamorgan is building his own town, it won't be fully established for several years. Looking at the city with countless beautiful houses before me, I think the shadow guards responsible for investigating Winter City should be fired. Could all these beautiful houses have been built in just this year? Winter City doesn't have the artisans to complete such a large project in such a short time. Just as I was pondering how to report my colleagues' negligence, the team arrived at the accommodations Winter City had arranged for us. The Winter Hotel? It sounds cliché, but the environment is quite pleasant. Lord Glamorgan of Winter City even provided comfortable rooms for me and my entire entourage. Even a common knight of the guards like me only shared a double room with another knight of the guards, not a crowded barracks. Honestly, if the barracks at Winterfell had anything like the conditions at Snowforest, I'd have considered it a very nice treat. I didn't expect to be treated so well. The Earl of Glamorgan is truly a generous and friendly lord. Only such a lord is worthy of marrying His Royal Highness Princess Sophia. I sat on the comfortable bed for a while. It was the first time I'd ever sat on such a comfortable bed, and I felt like sinking into it. After sitting quietly for a while, I got up to check out the bathroom. When the waiter had explained the functions and usage of these things, I was a little surprised to learn that the toilet was right in the room. But now, I'd kicked Mike out. He'd been in the bathroom for ages, so what was so interesting about it? After taking care of some necessary matters, I observed quietly for a while. The filth had indeed been flushed away, and there was no smell emanating. What an amazing facility. And that sink, where does all that water come from? And that glowing thing called a light, how convenient. I wonder if I could buy some and install them in the secret room? After a good night's rest, the comfortable bed made me a little reluctant to get up, but I still had a lot of work to do today, so I managed to sit up with a strong willpower. I glanced at the bed next to me. Mike was also awake, lying there with his eyes wide open, showing no sign of getting up. Tisk. What a disgrace to the night guards. I got up to wash up. I have to say, the bathroom is so convenient. I can solve all my problems without even leaving the room. And all that filth was cleaned up. I wonder where it was sent to. Is it underground? Isn't it piled up? Perhaps there's someone who specializes in cleaning these things? After sorting out my equipment and appearance, I dragged Mike out of bed and, mounting my equally well-rested warhorse, followed closely behind the carriage carrying Her Royal Highness the Princess and the Earl. I took a close look at everything in Winter City. Winter City is truly clean. Even near the farmlands where civilians lived, I saw no garbage, let alone muddy roads. Even the most inconspicuous alleyways were beautifully paved with cobblestones. It was incredible. Even if Winter City were just a small town, paving the entire town with cobblestones would be a monumental undertaking, not to mention its substantial size. The main roads, in particular, were incredibly wide. Taking all this into account, I continued my tour of Winter City. Following the princess, I was fortunate to hear a wealth of information, including information on the city's current farmland and its annual grain production. I was also briefed on the functions of the garbage and wastewater treatment plants, the water system, and the power plant. These explanations cleared up my confusion, and the list of things I needed to report seemed to be growing. I also learned that Winter City's cleanliness was due to the orders of our Lord, the Earl of Glamorgan. He had even established a security team to catch residents who littered or defecated in public. It's really exaggerated. Those guys who were caught were so unlucky that they actually ran into a lord with mysophobia. And after visiting the winter barracks, I realized that living in Iron Tree Keep was the worst. Chapter 253 Religious Beliefs in Winter City. Nitro Zeus was a Decepticon who loved to show off, and David gave him the opportunity to do so. Perhaps this would help the Decepticons better integrate into Winter City, as this performance was a showcase of the Winter Army's strength. Nitro Zeus's appearance would signal to the Decepticons, we have become part of Winter's Legion. Nitro Zeus did not disappoint David, performing various aerial maneuvers. Although Sutton Stewart and Princess Sophia didn't understand what these maneuvers meant, they knew that the giant metal bird darting through the sky was incredibly agile. Attacking these giant metal birds would be nearly impossible for soldiers standing on the ground. Nitro Zeus's subsequent ground attack performance also made Sutton understand why the people of the northern plains were so wary of Winter City's dragons. Ordinary soldiers were completely powerless against these dragons, and could only passively take the beating. Furthermore, the dragon's destructive power was incredible. In one round of attacks, an entire battalion of elite infantry was completely annihilated. Even if anyone survived, they'd likely be incapable of fighting. Sutton Stewart, who usually appeared nonchalant about many things, suddenly adopted a serious expression. He began to ponder, if Lord David Glamorgan of Winter City, dissatisfied with the status quo, aspired to become an independent kingdom, would the Kingdom of Tiran be able to stop him? It seems the new equipment can't be limited to just a few of the Tiran knights, everyone must be equipped. Sutton, preoccupied with important matters, briefly glanced at David beside him. He had never imagined that the young man he had once dismissed could wield such formidable power. David, sensing the attention, turned to Lord Sutton Stewart, smiled and nodded, then continued to brief Princess Sophia on the current situation of the Winter Legion. Although the Winter Knights were only established a short time ago and currently only have 50 soldiers, they have undergone rigorous training. Besides possessing impressive combat capabilities and proficiency in the use of both cold and hot weapons, they are also adept at operating various ground vehicles. Lord Sutton Stewart memorized all this information. During his recent tour, he already knew what ground vehicles were, those vehicles. He also knew what thermal weapons were, as the Nitro Zeus had just demonstrated their power. Meanwhile, David introduced the standard equipment of the Winter Knights, the Blizzard Power Armor. Of course, explaining the system parameters was pointless, and David didn't bother memorizing the data. He simply explained this heavy armor in simple, unpretentious terms. Winter Knights wearing Blizzard Power Armor gain enhanced defense, increased strength, and increased speed. Furthermore, they are capable of high-altitude airborne combat. As David introduced the situation, a Quinjet appeared in view. The hovering Quinjet opened its hatch, and 2 Winter Knights leaped out. Ah! Princess Sophia gasped in surprise at the 2 knights' sudden leap from such a height. But then she noticed the heavily armored knights paused in midair, their momentum slowing noticeably as they finally landed firmly on the ground. Though there was a dull thud and a cloud of dust, the 2 knights immediately sprinted towards their target, leaping high enough to cover a distance of dozens of meters. Wow! Princess Sophia observed this scene, as if remembering something, but after a moment's pause, she swallowed the words that were about to come out. Sutton Stewart breathed a sigh of relief at Princess Sophia's reaction, but then his expression grew more serious. He felt that simply upgrading their equipment wasn't enough. The Tilan Royal Alchemy Workshop needed to continue its efforts and upgrade the new equipment. After touring the winter barracks, the day's tour concluded. Earl Stewart and Princess Sophia, after a long day of activity, returned to rest, or perhaps find something else to occupy their time. The accompanying delegation members also had some free time to explore Winter City, a city still unfamiliar to them. Many people, from the Knights of the Tiran Order to the members of the Royal Guard, were eager to see the city in detail. With the increasing population, shops in Winter City had begun to operate normally, and the majority of those who arrived later found work in one of the shops. After all, these people no longer had the free benefits of the early arrivals, they now had to pay rent for their accommodations. Even without housing, they still needed to earn a living. The arrival of these people had significantly revitalized Winter City's economy, and now the city had finally taken on the appearance of a normal city. Because of this, the delegation had more space to wander around after being granted free time. They could also buy some rare finds not found in the capital, taking them back as souvenirs or gifts. Sutton Stewart didn't run around, he went straight back to the hotel to rest. He probably needed to sort out the intelligence he'd gathered today and think carefully about how to report back what he'd seen and heard. Sophia didn't suggest another tour, she was thinking about her future. She had already decided on David as her marriage partner, and that wouldn't change. But engagement and marriage were different, and she didn't feel the need to rush into a wedding. Perhaps she could stay in Winter City for a while, get to know David better, and understand his connections. She could also determine if she could accept the situation. If she truly couldn't, she still had some wiggle room, which was better than committing immediately. Furthermore, Sophia keenly realized that if she forced David to marry her immediately, things might not go the way she expected. Her guess was right, David would definitely not be able to accept marrying Sophia right away. But David didn't mind just staying. If Sophia couldn't accept his private life, she could leave at any time, If she could accept it, David wouldn't mind having a princess around him. As for whether staying would leak more information about Winter City, he really didn't care about that. Although hiding quietly in the border has many disadvantages, it also has many advantages. For example, he can develop with peace of mind in a relatively undisturbed environment. At this time, he has already consolidated various basic bases, and subsequent developments are all natural things. Even if the Kingdom of Tiran doesn't like him, it can't stop the continued development of his territory. David has always believed that as long as his strength is strong enough, he can still win even if he plays with open cards. If he can't win, it only proves that his strength is not strong enough. Are those envoys guards wandering around the city? Yes, Van Cleef had been so busy these past 2 days, mostly preparing for the mission. Most are just wandering around, with only a very small number gathering intelligence. In Edwin Van Cleef's eyes, the few gathering intelligence were quite conspicuous. They were likely ordinary knights or soldiers, making no attempt to conceal their actions, simply observing the various aspects of Winter City. Van Cleef suspected they were knights from the Tiran Knights and the Royal Guards, gathering intelligence from various locations as part of their professional routine. He had only discovered 3 professional intelligence officers, 1 from the Tiran Knights and 2 from the Royal Guards. These individuals were more professional, quietly touring Winter City's key areas during their seemingly ordinary activities, such as the industrial zone, the military barracks, the docks, and even visiting the Cathedral of Light. They almost all asked the same question: is there any connection between the Cathedral of Light and the temple? They also visited the temple's chapel, a small, unassuming structure built by missionary Rains in the northern part of the residential area. They had only learned about it through a trainee priest in the Cathedral of Holy Light, and then they toured the chapel. From their reactions, it was clear that the temple's various actions had long attracted the attention of the Tiran higher-ups, especially the intelligence services. It was clear that the Tiran higher-ups were wary of the temple. By the way, how's the work of that missionary Rains going here? Even Van Cleef, who always maintained a stern and serious expression, couldn't help but laugh. After some effort in Winter City, that missionary Rains has successfully recruited 4 followers, only 4, and those 4, including Wilcox, are all ours. David hadn't expected that the temple's missionary Rains would have such a difficult time in Winter City. At the same time, he was also amused. It seemed that establishing a foothold in Winter City wouldn't be so easy for the temple. What about the Cathedral of Light? Then he thought of the Cathedral of Light founded by Liodrin. It had already recruited many apprentice priests, but he wondered how long it would take for them to blossom. Archbishop Liodrin has recruited 10 apprentice priests. These priests ensure the normal operation of the cathedral, but none of them have truly grasped the holy light. As for the believers, even the newcomers to Winterfell have become accustomed to going to the Cathedral of Light, influenced by the older residents. The holy light has become Winterfell's primary religion and belief. Chapter 254: Gwen's Father's Invitation. David's greatest hope was for the holy light to become the primary faith of Winter City. If the locals of Bronia abandoned the holy light and instead worshipped the deities of the temple, he would be troubled, unsure how to handle the situation. Fortunately, things didn't pan out that way. Rains's missionary work in Winter City was largely unsuccessful, and the people of Winter City showed no interest in the temple's deities. The reason was simple: the holy light could truly help with injuries, illnesses, and other problems. The priests of the Church of the Light offered selfless assistance. And what about the temple? It wasn't as if that missionary actually helped at all. Because of this philosophy of the Church of the Light, its followers quickly gained recognition. Those who did good deeds without expecting anything in return were often seen as messengers of justice. Consequently, David, who wielded the holy light, earned a good reputation within Winter City. Perhaps the new residents weren't familiar with the holy light? However, the elders of Winterfell didn't find it tedious to educate these newcomers. They even enjoyed it, embellishing their knowledge with accolades, saying, "You're right to come to Winterfell. You should have come a long time ago. I'm telling you, blah 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 blah." Newcomers might initially be skeptical, but when they encountered problems and sought help from the priests of the Church of the Holy Light, the younger priests would do their utmost to assist until the problem was resolved, or until someone who could help was found. Under these circumstances, the temple missionaries in Winterfell were practically stranded. Rains was completely at a loss as to what to do. He kept wondering if Winterfell's situation was unique, or if he was simply lacking in ability. Was bringing the gods' favor to the north really that difficult? His mental state was strained, allowing Wilcox and his team to extract more information, including about the so-called old gods. Listening to Van Cleef's report, David was surprised to discover that the old gods the temple was referring to were actually the harvest goddess Luluti and the war god Sen. The goddess of harvest and the god of war are old gods, according to the information Wilcox has gathered. That's indeed the case. David stroked his chin. The temple called the gods who had helped humanity overthrow the Dark Elf Kingdom and establish their position on the continent of Brunia old gods, and they harbored a clear hostility towards them. This meant that the many gods enshrined in the temple weren't from the same faction as those two. It seemed the human side was far more complex than the Dark Elf side. Of course, it was also possible that these forces were simply fighting among themselves, and that all races, including humans, were merely pawns of the gods, and that ownership of these pawns wasn't fixed to any particular god. This situation is getting increasingly confusing, David chuckled, not dwelling on the situation too much. With his current strength, it seemed unnecessary to dwell on the factions and struggles among the gods, and he wasn't prepared to draw these pawns out so soon. His current focus remained on the various races on the continent of Brunia. He would continue to build strength against these pawns, preparing for the higher levels of battle that might arise. With a gentle wave of his hand, signaling Van Cleef to return to his work, David turned his chair and looked out the window. Thick clouds had already appeared in the sky outside, plunging the once shimmering northern lands into darkness. The office lights had already been turned on, and only after Van Cleef had left did Helen come in and greet David for dinner. "You didn't get another day off, don't underestimate my fitness." "I've recovered." Helen looked rosy and energetic, her voice a little higher than usual. Her good mood was evident, especially in the upturned corners of her mouth, which seemed to be hooked. Especially after going to the dungeon, after the training and baptism in the dungeon, Helen's physical fitness had indeed improved significantly, and her temperament had also changed. Originally, Helen was beautiful and delicate, like a piece of fragile porcelain, requiring careful care. Now, Helen was still beautiful, but that fragility was much less. As for her cherished and endearing temperament, she only displayed it in front of David. "Wait until the delegation led by Sutton Stewart leaves, then I'll take you back to the dungeon." David had originally planned to clear the normal difficulty level in one go, but the delegation happened to arrive in Winterfell, and with the incident with Princess Sophia, he had to put that plan aside for the time being. Following Helen to the dining room, he found Laura, Eva, and Gwen all sitting at the dining table. The servants of Castle Glamorgan had already laid out the food, waiting for David, the host, to take a seat. "What a great group of people here today." "What's going on?" "Nothing, we just happened to be here, so we just had dinner together." Laura saw David sit down, picked up her knife and fork, and began to enjoy the food in front of her. "It's not often that we sit together for dinner like this, is it?" "It's mainly because Gwen can't stay here all the time." David glanced at Gwen and suddenly remembered the piece of leather from before. He wondered what Gwen had done with it. "You talking about that thing?" "I asked Pierre to help me make it into equipment, but it'll take a few days to get it." Someone started the conversation. Gwen, despite the awkward atmosphere, continued, "Vanessa and I have been learning something new these past couple of days, and I've suddenly realized I have a natural talent for being an assassin." "Are you learning stealth?" "Yes." Gwen gave a live demonstration. Everyone watched as Gwen, seated in a chair, gradually vanished. Although a faint outline could be seen, it looked as if nothing was there unless one looked closely. A moment later, Gwen reappeared, smiling at everyone, as if waiting for their praise. "Excellent. Learning stealth carries significant risks. It's said that every year, when SI-7 trains intelligence officers in stealth, numerous trainees suffer accidents, such as falling into the chasm between shadow and reality and never being able to exit, or plummeting into another dimension. However, learning any esoteric knowledge carries significant risks, and since Gwen's studies were going smoothly, there was no need to discourage her in this situation." Privately, David prepared to remind Gwen to be more careful. In this situation, all he needed to do was give her a generous dose of praise. Furthermore, Gwen's opening conversation completely dispelled the awkward atmosphere. After all, it wasn't the first time the women at the dinner table had met. They'd previously worked together in the dungeon to kill monsters. "That's great. I can only learn the priest's holy light spells," Eva said. After leaving the dungeon, she tried to learn some new things, but unfortunately, only the priest's holy light mage was a quick learner, the others were completely intractable. Helen, on the other hand, said she hadn't even begun to grasp the holy light and was now racking her brains over which power to learn. Hearing Helen's dilemma, Eva offered a suggestion. Holy light? If you're really stuck, you can ask David for help. Laura offered another option. If Helen wasn't interested in the holy light, arcane would be fine too. I heard Sharon has been learning combat techniques from the high elven spellbreakers brought by Sylvanas. For the people of Winterfell, holy light and arcane energy were by far the easiest to master. As the number of holy light users in Winter City grew, newcomers could not only learn and comprehend on their own, but also seek out acquaintances to help them instill the holy light. As for the latter, since Pierre Newton arrived in Winter City, acquiring arcane energy had become much easier. The real challenge now lay in harnessing it. As long as Helen could mobilize it, acquiring arcane energy would be a simple matter. In this situation, the woman who is the Lord of Winter City could choose according to her preferences. Besides Helen's hesitation about which power to choose, Gwen was discussing a similar topic with David, but she wasn't interested in learning any particular power, but rather in developing combat techniques. After battling in the dungeon, she realized that what she lacked wasn't some mystical power, but rather a systematic understanding of combat. I've truly overlooked this, David hadn't noticed. Gwen was just an ordinary high school student. How could she possibly know how to fight? Helen was in a similar situation. Their previous success in the dungeon was largely due to David and Laura's care, and the relatively low difficulty of the dungeon at that time. What kind of skills do you want to learn? Firearms? Daggers? Short blades? Long swords? I want to learn hand-to-hand combat. Gwen had a very good reason. In her own world, she couldn't just pull out a weapon at will. Some small conflicts were better resolved with bare hands. As for the use of weapons, she would of course learn. Of course, no problem. By the way, there's another thing. What? Gwen originally wanted to talk to David alone in private, but when she looked around, Helen was discussing various powers with Eva and Laura, and she probably didn't notice her. So she moved closer to David and whispered an invitation to David. My father noticed that I have a boyfriend, so he wants to invite you to my house. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly found that the surroundings had become very quiet. She turned her head slightly and saw that the other women had stopped discussing and were staring at her and David. Hey, I'll see if I'm free someday soon. Chapter 255. The increasingly lively Wolfburg. Laura and Helen were quite astute, while Eva often seemed rather goofy, especially when she smiled. But anyone who truly treated her as such was truly goofy. Gwen was the only one present who truly stood out. In terms of age, experience, and personality, she was the sweetest of the bunch. To ease Gwen's awkwardness, David shifted the conversation to the most noteworthy person in Gwen's world. Spider-Man has been active there for a while, right? Yes, Gwen nodded immediately, as if hoping everyone would ignore what had just happened. I did some research on my world's Peter Parker, having previously encountered both the other Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. The Gwen in question didn't find the existence of another Peter Parker in her own world strange. She simply wondered if her own Peter Parker was also Spider-Man. Unfortunately, although Spider-Man primarily operated in New York, he was constantly moving around, making it difficult to meet him. Gwen could only use some intricate methods to find information about Peter Parker, but she still couldn't confirm whether they were the same person. From Gwen's description, David learned that Spider-Man in her world had been around for about a year, and the turmoil caused by the Green Goblin had long since ended. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, Peter Parker would soon attend the same university as Gwen and become an assistant to Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius. Dr. Octopus, he's a talent. Gwen's Spider-Man world actually had quite a few talented people. If the old Green Goblin hadn't suffered from schizophrenia due to the side effects of the enhancement potion, he'd be a worthy candidate for recruitment. Osborn Technologies was also a powerful technology company. Unfortunately, David suddenly realized that while his own Osborn Corporation had been missed, the Osborn Corporation from another world might still be able to be recruited to Winterfell. Norman Osborn from the Extraordinary World was already critically ill upon his appearance, leaving him no chance to commit any evil. Harry Osborn, the Green Goblin, offered a good chance of being recruited. Winning over the Green Goblin wouldn't be difficult. All it took was curing his genetic disease. After eating and chatting, David prepared to retire to his study to while away the hours. Miraculously, the women, usually so busy with their own affairs, were now on the same page and eager to join David. Arriving in the study, Helen and Laura each chose a book to read. The books were all Laura's regulars, covering a wide range of genres and languages, some even reprinted in the common language of Brunia. They each found a spot to read. David browsed around before finally choosing one and collapsing on a recliner to begin reading. Gwen didn't bother searching for a book, but instead transformed into a sloth and draped over David. She then glanced at the book he had pulled out. Is it in Chinese? Yes. A Chinese novel. What's it called? A Romance of the Three Kingdoms. David casually flipped open the book and began to read. As he did so, the study fell silent, only the occasional rustling of pages. After reading for a while, David realized it was getting late. Although everyone's physiques were already beyond average, and he himself had become a transcendental being, he still maintained a normal lifestyle, not giving up on eating or sleeping. After relaxing with a book for a while, he suddenly understood why everyone was acting this way today. Sophia's appearance hadn't just irritated Helen, even Laura felt a sense of crisis. A glance at Laura was met with a roll of the eyes and a warning, I won't be with you today. Eva and Helen glanced at Gwen, still clinging to David, but didn't fight with the younger sister. They each said goodnight to David and retired to their rooms. As their relationship stabilized, they each had their own rooms in Glamorgan Castle, including Gwen, who had a room all to herself. Is Princess Sophia moving in soon? Not sure yet. Maybe she doesn't want to live here. After briefly teaching Gwen a few fighting techniques, David and Gwen looked out the dark window and chatted about Princess Sophia. If she doesn't live here, where will she live? Will she stay in a hotel? Winter City has plenty of open space. Building her a manor wouldn't be too much of a hassle. If Princess Sophia decided to stay in Winter City, it would certainly be more than just a princess's stay. Servants, maids, and guards would all stay. As a princess, she certainly needed her own trusted associates. Their food, clothing, shelter, and transportation would all fall under the responsibility of David, the Lord of Winter City, even if he wasn't her husband yet. That sounds a bit cumbersome, Gwen asked. What would Princess Sophia do in Winter City for the next while? When the welcome party and tour is over? Whatever you want to do. Barring any unexpected events, Sutton Stewart will lead a delegation out of Winter City and return to the capital in a few days. The mission of the delegation, led by Earl Sutton Stewart, was to convey His Majesty's award, assess the situation on the northern plains, and ensure the safe transport of Princess Sophia to Winter City. These tasks were completed, and he had also taken the opportunity to inquire about Winter City's situation. After completing these tasks, he couldn't possibly stay here for long, even until winter was completely over. Winter in the northern plains was incredibly long. Was he expected to stay in Winter City for half a year? That was unrealistic. His Majesty was still awaiting his report. So, after arriving in Winter City, completing the necessary tasks, and taking a few days to rest, the delegation regrouped and prepared to return to the capital. Even so, they happened to catch the first heavy snowfall of the year on the northern plains. Uncle, what bad luck! Princess Sophia forgot her jewelry for insulation today, instead donning a warm cotton coat made in Winter City. The thick, almost chubby feeling of wrapping herself up in this way was a novelty. Even though her chubby cheeks were flushed from the cold, she had no intention of wearing the enchanted jewelry. Looking at the already thick layer of white snow on the ground and the white flakes still slowly falling from the sky, Princess Sophia finally saw the scene she had longed to see, a vast expanse of white snow, and a drifting snowfall that almost connected the sky and the earth. As for the delegation, which was gradually retreating, its tracks gradually obscured by the wind and snow, what was there to see? Is there nothing wrong with them? The members of the delegation have all changed into thicker cotton coats and cloaks, and they've brought plenty of supplies, so they should be fine. As long as the delegation left the northern plains and passed the northern plains outpost, there would be no danger. As for the elves in the Ironwood Forest, if they dared to attack the delegation, they would be courting death. Come to think of it, I haven't paid attention to those elves in a while. David suddenly remembered that the elves had established an outpost fortress south of Winter City, at the southern end of the former Ironwater village, and north of the Ironwood Forest. For over 6 months, he had been focusing solely on the surrounding human forces and orcs, completely ignoring this old neighbor. Now that no other human forces existed on the northern plains, and the orcs posed no threat for the time being, shouldn't he first make arrangements for this old neighbor? David pondered for a few seconds when he turned and saw Sophia squatting there playing in the snow. Even more speechless, Gwen was also squatting there playing with Sophia. Speaking of which, they were indeed close in age, so it wasn't surprising that they could play together. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about Princess Sophia lacking playmates while staying in Winterfell. Sophia had already decided to stay in Winterfell and would move directly into Castle Glamorgan. To ensure Princess Sophia's daily needs, her accompanying maids and servants also remained in Winterfell. A knight from the Order of Tiran also served as the princess's personal guard, along with a squad of 10 knights under his command. The princess's personal guard was a female knight named Magnolia. This was David's first encounter with a female knight in this world. He wondered how skilled she was. Furthermore, according to Edwin Van Cleef's report, among the 10 knights guards left behind in Winterfell, one, named Ulysses, was a professional intelligence officer. David instructed Van Cleef to keep a close eye on this individual, but to disregard any further action unless he posed a life-threatening threat to those within Winterfell. Your Highness, let's return to Castle Glamorgan. A large group had been escorted to the outskirts of Winterfell to escort Lord Sutton Stewart. Although Winterfell lacked gates, its boundaries were clearly defined. They turned and headed towards Winterfell, while David specifically called Sophia aboard. After picking up Sophia and Gwen, David, without greeting anyone else, quickly rode the iron carriage back to Castle Glamorgan. In reality, abandoning everyone and returning quickly was the best option for everyone. He could simply take the princess and leave, allowing them to disperse and attend to their own affairs. As the car approached the gates of Castle Glamorgan, David noticed a man waving from the side of the road, seemingly trying to stop a car. David looked at the man. He was wearing very little, huddled up in a ball, and his face was a bit confused. Coupled with the familiar face of Atang, David immediately realized that this was a newcomer. He had TP stop the car in front of the man and lowered the window. "Do you need any help?" The young man was stunned for a moment, but he immediately thanked him. "Thank you very much. Can you tell me where this is?" Chapter 256, Saving the World. "This is Winter City." David looked at the face of the man with a Tang-like face, curious about which Tang was standing before him. "Come in. You're not dressed to stand here and talk any longer." The pickup truck that the iron sheet transformed into was a 4-door truck with 2 rows of seats, plenty of room for another person. The man with a Tang-like face knew that if he continued to stay outdoors in such a cold and snowy climate with so little clothing, he would soon become a corpse. Damn it. He was clearly on vacation, so how did he suddenly end up in such a cold place? And what was Winter City? Recalling his memories, he realized he had no idea what country the so-called Winter City was in. Regardless, he decided it was best to get in the car. He opened the door and saw 2 young girls sitting in the car, in addition to the young man in the driver's seat. This combination made him let down his guard a little. He had suddenly arrived in an unfamiliar place, and his professional habits made him wary of his surroundings and everyone who appeared before him. But the combination of a young man and 2 young girls didn't seem threatening at all. "Hello." After greeting the 2 young girls, he thanked the young man in the front seat and introduced himself. "My name is Ethan. Thank you for your help." "My name is David." "You're welcome." Hearing the name behind him, David knew which Tang was in the car. Although he didn't have eyes in the back of his head, David could sense that the tone of his response had aroused Ethan's suspicion. However, it didn't matter, as he was about to explain everything to this elite agent. Driving into Castle Glamorgan, Ethan hadn't been able to see clearly because of the wind and snow. Only when the car stopped in front of the gate did he notice the shape of the house. This, if it weren't for the different color, he would have wondered if he had arrived in Washington, D.C. and the surroundings didn't look like this. Where exactly had he been? More and more questions filled his mind. Then he noticed that after the people got out, the black pickup truck's doors automatically closed and drove away without anyone behind the wheel. He began to wonder if he was dreaming. Or perhaps I was hallucinating? He was about to ask something, but the young man named David interrupted him. "Come in first, you need a cup of hot tea to warm yourself up." Ethan withdrew his question and followed David on, observing the building's interior. Upon entering, he noticed that, while there were many minor differences, the general layout was identical to the original. Could it have been a deliberate imitation? Who could have such a bad taste? In the reception room, only David and Ethan were seated. Sophia was taken away by Gwen, who offered to give her a good tour of Glamorgan Castle. Ethan noticed that the 2 young women spoke an unfamiliar language. Even Ethan, trained and fluent in many languages, found it completely unfamiliar. He had initially thought he was in England, hearing David's perfect British English, but now it seemed he might be in Northern Europe. Judging by the weather outside, perhaps somewhere in northern Europe? Soon, a maid brought hot tea, fruit, and snacks. Looking at the exquisite snacks in front of him, Ethan simply cupped the hot tea in his hands to warm himself, not even taking a sip. David didn't care for his behavior. From the moment he heard his name and knew his identity, he knew that this Ethan in front of him would definitely behave similarly. What I'm about to say may be hard to believe, but please understand one thing, I'm not kidding. Seeing David's serious expression, Ethan nodded, indicating that he would listen carefully and not miss any details. But when David actually spoke out and told him what he had experienced, Ethan still found it hard to believe. Are you kidding, Ethan? Having forcibly restrained himself from interrupting until David had finished his story, finally couldn't help himself. This is all a prank, actually. Who planned this, Sarah? Hannah? No, it's more like that guy Jack. The hot tea in his hand was no longer so hot, and with the warmth in the room, Ethan felt his frozen body gradually returning to normal. But that guy shouldn't be able to mobilize so many resources. Could it be Jim? It's hard to believe, but what I said before was the truth. David took another sip of his tea. Although more and more people were arriving in Winter City, and he had seen similar scenes countless times, he still found them amusing no matter how many times he saw them. Especially when one finds their preconceived notions shattered. He explained how to travel back and forth freely, suggesting that if Ethan didn't believe it, he could go out and test it himself. By the way, if you want to test it multiple times, it's best to change clothes first. Thank you for the reminder. Ethan didn't ask David for clothes. He wanted to rush out and test David's story thoroughly. Although it sounded incredible, the other party's confident tone, coupled with the fact that this was indeed the simplest way to verify it, made him think that even if he was deceived, it wouldn't matter. Maybe if he foolishly ran back and forth a few times, Jack and his gang would jump out and laugh at him. Whether it was real or just a prank, as long as he went out and tested it, he would get a clear answer. Watching Ethan hurried away, David thought for a moment and called Eva. If Ethan comes back later, take him around and get a basic understanding. Eva could help with the basics of Winter City. David didn't need to keep a close eye on this elite agent. After determining the situation, what would Ethan do? David didn't know, and he hadn't figured out how to treat this elite agent. For him, the agent's greatest value was that, through Ethan, he could recruit more agents, or intelligence personnel, from his world to work for Winterfell. As for Ethan himself, he wasn't sure if he was willing to stay permanently in Winterfell. What are Gwen and Sophia doing now? They're both in the study. Yes, after David gave Eva his instructions, he didn't go find Gwen or Sophia. Instead, he went to the dungeon entrance and found Aidan. The arrival of the mission had prevented David from frequently entering the dungeon to kill monsters, interrupting his plan to quickly clear the normal difficulty. But this gave Aidan plenty of uninterrupted time. While everyone was busy with the mission, Aidan cleared the normal difficulty in one go and unlocked the next level, Nightmare. How was it? The dungeon's difficulty is tied to your individual. After David adjusted the difficulty to Nightmare, the door seemed locked and wouldn't open. Aidan, on the other hand, could easily open it, and the situation after opening it was no different from the normal difficulty. It seems Tyrion wants to farm monsters in the Hell Dungeon only after clearing both normal and Nightmare difficulties. Of course, after David and Aidan's testing, there's another solution. Let Aidan, who has access to Nightmare difficulty, open the door. Then, they can enter the same dungeon world. That way, even if they haven't cleared normal difficulty, they can still enter the higher difficulty dungeon. I don't have much else to do anyway, so just staying here as a door opener won't hurt anything, Aidan said, gently touching his forehead. Besides, I think this kind of thing will be of great benefit to me. As he cleared normal difficulty, he could clearly feel the soul stone on his forehead being absorbed. Once he had cleared both Nightmare and Hell difficulties, the soul stone would likely be completely absorbed, its power becoming his own. At this point, even Aidan understood that the energy that sustained this dungeon world must come from the power of the Dreadlord Diablo within the soul stone. This power, transformed by a unique force he couldn't understand, became the unique form of the dungeon, available for those who entered without side effects. In other words, everyone's repeated battles in the dungeon, absorbing energy, were, in a sense, fighting Diablo. Once Diablo's energy was absorbed by everyone, perhaps the Dreadlord would be completely destroyed, and their world would no longer be threatened by this infernal demon. Every thought of this gave him an immense surge of motivation, as he entered the dungeon and repeatedly slew the demons of the dungeon world. He also didn't mind being the gatekeeper, because the more people entered the dungeon and slew monsters, the sooner Diablo's demise would arrive. There's no need for you to guard it constantly. Besides, clearing the normal difficulty isn't a big deal. David also guessed that the energy that maintained the dungeon world and the energy gained from killing monsters came from the sanctuary world. However, unlike Aedon's speculation, David felt that Diablo alone wasn't enough. Perhaps the dungeon was actually drawing on the hellish dimension of that world. Besides, completing a normal difficulty level once gives everyone a clearer understanding of the various situations in the dungeon, helping to avoid potential accidents. He hopes to use the dungeon to train and improve everyone's strength, and doesn't want anyone to get into trouble in the dungeon. Speaking of which, can people die in the game world? That's a question. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257, Gwen's Black Poison Queen Suit. David wanted to test it, but it wasn't easy. Was he supposed to commit suicide in the dungeon? The most logical approach would be to find a death row inmate, but Winter City didn't have any. Sheriff Elizabeth's current arrests were mostly for urinating or defecating in public. Warnings, fines, or forced street cleaning were the most severe punishments in Winter City. Even the newly built detention center hadn't been used. It was said that Sean, who had joined the Winter City security team, often stared blankly at the empty detention center, occasionally lamenting that he had never seen such good public security in a city. The entire Northern Plains was now officially his domain, and everyone in it was his subject. As a righteous, kind, generous, and handsome New Age lord, he wouldn't just kill anyone to test whether there were any real deaths in the dungeon. Test it with animals like chickens and ducks. Laura had previously brought her pets, 2 northern giant wolves, into the dungeon. After a period of leveling up, the 2 northern giant wolves had become stronger and smarter. In other words, animals could be brought in. So, should it be possible to test for death? After a few seconds of thought, David used the communicator to have Eva send over a chicken, and he conducted the test using it. The test wasn't smooth, and some time was wasted, but thankfully, they reached a definitive conclusion. They didn't seem to have to fear death in the dungeon. Even if these players entering from outside were killed by monsters, they could be resurrected in camp. It was just like in the game, except there would be no equipment drops and no need to loot corpses. As for any penalties? Chicken couldn't speak, so he couldn't describe his specific feelings to David. David suspected that if Chicken could speak, he wouldn't be talking about his own experiences after death, but rather offering a heartfelt greeting to David and Aedon's ancestors. Anyway, it's good to know you can't truly die in the dungeon, even if there were any penalties, even if it meant losing some experience upon resurrection, that was acceptable. This way, we can confidently level up in the dungeon and kill monsters. Gwen, Helen, and the others wouldn't even have to be protected by David and Laura to enter the dungeon. They could spend this time learning how to fight, and then they could enter the dungeon on their own in their free time. Once they beat the normal difficulty level, they'd be able to grow as well. Just as she was thinking this, Gwen suddenly called. "What's wrong?" "No. Pierre called me and said the equipment I wanted is ready. He told me to go get it myself. Do you want to come?" "Oh? Perfect. I want to see what's been crafted, too." Gwen contacted David for another reason. She needed to retrieve something special. Could she still bring Sophia with her? This princess was inherently different from Gwen and the others. She was a local, a princess of the Kingdom of Tiran. Everyone around him knew David's intentions. David held no loyalty to the Kingdom of Tiran. He was simply leveraging its reputation and resources to enrich himself. When the Kingdom of Tiran could no longer be of any use to him, David's impending expulsion was inevitable. He did have locals among his staff, like Gareth Stanton and Floyd, who were native to this world. They had sworn fealty to David and proven their loyalty and ability through their actions. Even so, when these two first arrived at Winterfell, they were completely unaware of many things. Elias, the ceremonial officer, who followed David everywhere, was also initially bewildered. He was faced with a vast sea of incomprehensible information, yet no one explained it to him, forcing him to figure it out on his own. Only now, to these seasoned individuals, were some of Winterfell and its lord's secrets fully revealed. Princess Sophia's new arrival, coupled with her sensitive status, seemed to necessitate concealing many matters within Winterfell. But David paid no heed. Is it really okay? It doesn't matter. She's already settled in Glamorgan Castle. She'll surely see a lot of things. Even if we keep it a secret from her, it won't last long. He never considered Princess Sophia a fool. Although she was young, she was quite intelligent, judging by what she had said earlier. Even if the Kingdom of Tiran finds out, it won't matter. Helen, after learning the news, brought Gwen and Sophia along, and prepared to go see what was going on. Only Eva remained in the office, continuing her work. They drove to the Winter Alchemy Workshop. While Winter City's most important research and rare material processing department, it was quiet. Winter City only had a handful of alchemists, and unless there were emergencies, they couldn't be at the workshop all day. They usually went about their business. Leonard and the others had to work at the university most of the time, so only Pierre Newton and Will Turner were there regularly. "Where's the stuff?" David glanced at Pierre. The old alchemist was sitting on a recliner, reading a book with great interest. Beside the recliner was a platter of cut fruit and hot tea. He looked very comfortable. Pierre looked away from the book for a second, then stood up when he saw that it was David who had arrived, showing his full respect to David as the Lord. "This is it," Pierre pointed to black tights on the table next to him. "In addition to the leather that Gwen brought, some other materials have been added, but the main material is still that leather." The black tights on the table looked nothing special. The color was also pitch black without any decoration. "What functions does this suit have?" "Oh, there are so many." Pierre suddenly perked up at this, clearly pleased with the piece. "This suit has impressive defensive capabilities and is incredibly resistant to magic. When mixed with a bit of crystal or powder, its defensive capabilities even surpass those of ordinary heavy armor." David had already reached out to touch the tights. It didn't feel very thick at all, but he hadn't expected such strong defensive capabilities. "Is it really that strong?" "Of course. You can try it for yourself." "Try? You mean for me to wear it?" "Yes, forget it." David examined the one-piece tights. He had no interest in such attire, but if Gwen, Helen, or Laura wore them, he'd be more interested. "Let Gwen wear it." Pierre didn't force them, continuing to explain the suit's functions. Besides its defensive capabilities and impressive magic resistance, this suit, crafted from some unknown leather, also had the ability to release spider webs and toxins. Also, after wearing this suit, you can walk on walls and even rooftops as if it were flat ground." To help them understand, Pierre gave a familiar example. "Just like Peter Parker." "You mean, wearing this suit gives you the same abilities as Spider-Man?" Gwen stared at the plain black bodysuit in surprise. She had just wanted to make some protective gear for easier movement, but she hadn't expected such a surprise. David wondered why the suit had become a Spider-Man suit. When did Pierre become a Spider-Man fan? Upon further questioning, he discovered that it wasn't deliberately crafted this way. Rather, while crafting the suit, Pierre discovered that the material itself possessed those abilities. In fact, of the functions he'd described so far, aside from the enhanced defense gained by adding the crystal or powder, all the other abilities were inherent to the material itself. Could it be because of Andariel? The leather had exploded from Andariel's body. Andariel looked like a hybrid of human and spider, and she could indeed release toxins, so it didn't seem surprising that this piece of equipment had this ability. As for the added comfort of the wearer, a host of enchantments, such as breathability, dryness, sweat absorption, and stability, were added to ensure the suit felt comfortable. Sounds great. Overall, this tight suit didn't grant the wearer any significant boosts to strength or speed, but it offered decent physical and magical defense, along with some useful abilities like silk and toxin release. Gwen could wear this suit without affecting her ability to wear other protective gear, even a set of blizzard power armor. Furthermore, to allow Gwen to carry other items while wearing the suit alone, the suit also served as a storage device, allowing her to easily access various items when using it. This function is very practical. David blinked, and suddenly understood how some game characters could take out various things from their backs or other places at will. Those people use this kind of storage clothes, right? It's just the appearance. Isn't it too plain? I asked Gwen to come here in person for this. If she has any preferences, she can tell me and I can help her change it immediately. I see. Otherwise, Pierre could just pack up the battle suit casually and find an assistant to help deliver the things to Fort Glamorgan. There would be no need for Gwen to make a special trip. It seems that this battle suit still has the last step to be completed. David looked at the black tights, thought of Andrew, and then looked at Gwen. An image with exactly these elements flashed through his mind: the Black Poison Queen. Chapter 258 Piccolo Assault Rifle. While the Black Venom Queen was supposed to be a combination of Venom and Gwen, that wasn't a major issue. Andrew, the demon from Hell, held a much higher profile. The equipment, crafted from the item dropped by Andrew, the Queen of Pain and Torment, was more aptly named the Black Venom Queen. David briefly described his idea, and to make it easier for Pierre to understand, he used alchemy to demonstrate the general design. Pierre Newton then used alchemy to modify the suit on the table, and soon the Black Venom Queen suit David had envisioned appeared before them. It was a pure black suit with a white spider pattern on the chest. Unlike the Black Venom Queen David remembered, this suit lacked the sinister veins, replacing them with a subtle purple hue. The white pattern was smoother, and the hands didn't transform into claws. Other differences were minimal: a hood, high heels, and 6 spider legs that could be stowed away at all times but deployed from the back when needed. After completing the cosmetic modifications, Gwen donned the suit, which perfectly showcased her increasingly refined figure: a slim waist, long legs, high heels, and a massive, flared back. David, looking at the look, suddenly felt a bit like he was transported to StarCraft. How is it? Gwen couldn't see her current appearance, so she could only carefully feel the tights. She found them very comfortable, without any sense of stuffiness or oppression. And although they were high heels, they felt like sneakers, allowing her to sprint at high speeds without any problems. Very handsome. Helen and David were still examining her. Sophia had already praised her, her face flushing. The suit was a bit too tight, she wouldn't dare wear it like that. Now that I'm wearing it, it's a good opportunity to test its functionality and effectiveness. Here, come with me. The Winter Alchemy Workshop was constantly busy with research and experiments, and had a dedicated testing area. Pierre led Gwen to a testing room. The others could admire Gwen, or rather the various features of the suit, through specially reinforced glass windows in the adjacent observation room. David, Helen, and Sophia quickly saw the various features Pierre had described in action. Gwen moved freely across walls and ceilings, enduring the strange sensation of being suspended upside down. She could clearly feel that gravity wouldn't pull her back to the ground unless she chose to. With a thud, her feet detached from the ceiling, and she flipped lightly in midair, landing steadily on the ground. I feel like my balance has improved a lot since I put on the suit. Gwen's reflexes were already superior to those of ordinary people, and after a period of dungeon crawling and further strengthening her physical fitness, they were even better. Now, with the suit's enhanced balance, she felt she could achieve the same miraculous feats as Peter Parker. She reached out and tested the silk spray. The suit didn't have to fire silk from the wrist, it could be fired from anywhere, even directly. Using her hand made aiming easier and easier for follow-up actions. She also discovered she could release toxins individually or attach them to silk or other objects, allowing for flexible use depending on her whims. Besides testing all the features Pierre had described, Gwen also discovered something surprising: stealth became much easier while wearing the suit, completely obliterating even her already inconspicuous presence. David used to be able to easily locate Gwen in stealth, but now he found it took time and effort even for him. "This suit is amazing," Gwen said, finishing her tests, removing it and changing back into her regular clothes. "It's just a little inconvenient to carry, because the suit was designed as a storage device. Ordinary storage devices couldn't hold it." Pierre had already considered this issue. He handed Gwen a ring. "This is specifically for storing your suit. It has no other function." Pierre also suggested that if she wasn't satisfied with the ring's design, David could modify it. Such minor matters were perfectly manageable. "Right." After explaining everything and watching Gwen happily put her suit away and put the ring on her finger, Pierre said to David, "You'd better tell everyone that any special materials like this should be sent to the alchemy workshop first, not handled on your own." Pierre knew about the dungeon and knew that this item was produced there. He was curious if there would be more rare and exotic materials there. He even considered going there himself when he had the time. As for his combat prowess, back then, he'd traveled extensively across the continent and lived a stable life to this age, not by simply being able to conjure gold and jewels. "I'll give Aidan a heads up." After telling Aidan, most dungeon goers knew about it. Pierre, aware of it, nodded and prepared to escort David and the others. Tony's voice suddenly rang through David's communicator. "Dear Lord Glamorgan, if you have time, please come to Stark Manor. There's something good there." After replying, "Got it, I'll be right there," David glanced at the others around him. "New fun to see. Want to join us?" Of course, not only Sophia was excited, but even Pierre put down the book he had just picked up. He wanted to see what Tony Stark had cooked up. So they drove from the alchemy workshop to Stark Manor. Tony wasn't surprised to see Pierre tagging along. Before contacting David, he'd asked Eva, and she knew David was taking Gwen to the alchemy workshop to pick up something. He hadn't had any free time, so she had specifically called David over. "What do you want me to see?" Tony didn't go out to greet him. Everyone was so familiar with each other, and David wouldn't have trouble finding a place. Telling David to come directly to the testing grounds, Tony waited for him. Winter City's newest general-purpose assault rifle, codenamed Piccolo. Piccolo? Isn't that flute? I've decided to use the flute name for the sniper version of the rifle. The official name of this assault rifle is Piccolo. David didn't care. Piccolo, so to speak. The name sounded more powerful. Looking down, he saw a long, black firearm before him, resembling a long black box. The grip, stock, trigger, and muzzle were easily visible, so no one would mistake it for a box. Reaching out to lift the Piccolo assault rifle, David felt the weight. Compared to ordinary assault rifles, this one was surprisingly heavy. Also, the overall size seemed a bit large. But upon closer inspection, there were no ordinary soldiers in Winter City. This weight was nothing to those undergoing grueling training and constantly improving their abilities. Perhaps the size issue is due to the blizzard power armor? Tony raised the Piccolo assault rifle and pointed it at a nearby target. Boom. 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 A faint blue light. The sound was loud, but not deafening. David fired a few shots and found the rifle's recoil wasn't particularly strong. This little recoil was practically negligible for the Winter Knights in their power armor. As for power, this assault rifle can easily rip a main battle tank to shreds, powered by an energy core crafted from a combination of advanced technologies and firing specially crafted caseless ammunition. This new weapon possessed immense destructive power. Space technology allowed for an astonishing ammunition capacity. The current standard magazine held 500 rounds. It wasn't that magazines with larger ammunition capacities couldn't be manufactured, but there wasn't a need for them at the moment. The entire Piccolo assault rifle resembles a long box, primarily housing the cooling system. It's also powered by a specially designed energy core, making it virtually immune to barrel overheating. Listening to Tony's explanation, David felt this was a bit outrageous, defying common sense. "What exactly is this special energy core you're talking about?" "This is it." Tony casually picked up a small part. The most striking thing was the faintly glowing crystal encased within it, crystal ore, which enriches the energy within. David hadn't imagined that the true core of this new rifle was crystal ore. Not only that, the barrel has also been specially treated, with crystal ore powder incorporated into its manufacture. Tony couldn't help but exclaim, "Crystal ore is truly amazing. It defies many of my assumptions." Even just for the crystal ore, a specialty of Winter City, Tony couldn't bear to leave. The more he studied this thing, the more amazing it seemed to him. He felt that he had not yet truly developed all the potential of the crystal ore. If he could develop all its potential, Winter City would surely be able to colonize alien planets. After sighing for a while, Tony continued to introduce the new gun. "Let's not talk about the crystal ore first, let's continue with this new rifle." He casually pointed at the sunglasses on the table and asked David to try them on. "What is this?" David put on the sunglasses and found a series of prompts on the sunglasses. Detected compatible equipment, connecting. Connection completed. Then, the crosshairs commonly seen in shooting games appeared on David's sunglasses. Each Piccolo assault rifle can be connected to the operating system of the Blizzard power armor, allowing the user to aim at the target more easily. Chapter 259, Winter City no longer divides houses. David tried a few more times. Aiming with the crosshairs on his glasses made hitting the target incredibly easy, even easier than when he was playing games back in the day. "Want to try it?" The women looked at each other and eventually fired a few test shots. While the rifle was a bit heavy for them, it wasn't unmanageable. After a few shots, they had no trouble getting a feel for it. To David's surprise, Princess Sophia's physique was even better than Gwen and Helen, who had cleared a dungeon. This seemingly delicate girl handled the rifle with ease, showing no signs of strain. As Pierre raised his rifle to test it out, David turned back to Tony and got down to business. Is this rifle considered finalized? Yes, the Piccolo assault rifle had been completely finalized. The one before David was the official product, and production would begin based on this design. What? What are your thoughts? No. This gun is already powerful. The power exceeded my expectations. He had originally thought Tony had been impressive enough to create a rifle slightly more powerful than the previous Dwarven Garand, but he hadn't expected him to create such a devastating weapon. This rifle should be used for quite a while. After all, the forces you're facing are complex, so the weapons and equipment must be as powerful as possible. Tony didn't find this surprising. After all, David's current targets weren't just the forces on the Bronian continent. Furthermore, considering the gods behind these forces, no one knew what kind of power they wielded. Will manufacturing this weapon be difficult? Such a powerful weapon couldn't be manufactured quickly, right? But Tony didn't see that as a problem at all, and with just a few words, David realized he was overthinking it. How many soldiers did Winterfell currently have? The Winter Knights only have 50 members, and even with all the new recruits from the Spartan heavy infantry, there's only a little over 1,000. Even if they were completely handcrafted, they wouldn't be short of supplies. Underneath Tony Stark Manor is a fully automated production facility. As long as the raw materials are sufficient, assembling an Iron Soldier takes only a moment, and this rifle's complexity isn't much higher than that of an Iron Soldier. In other words, currently, the speed of raw material supply is limiting the production of this new weapon. However, the rifle's core material is crystal ore, and after several upgrades, its production capacity is no longer a problem for Winter City's development. So, production speed and quantity aren't issues at all. In a short time, I can have every soldier in Winter City equipped with this new rifle, not only the current Winter Knights and Spartan heavy infantry, but even newly recruited soldiers will receive the new rifles in advance, allowing them to quickly learn how to use them. Speaking of which, should the Spartan heavy infantry also begin transitioning to Blizzard power armor, there's no rush yet. Their physical fitness still needs to improve. The first batch of Spartans had already been training for quite some time. While their skills were still inferior to those of the Knights of Winter, they had barely reached the standard for using power armor. This meant that some of the elite Spartan heavy infantry could indeed begin learning how to use power armor. The subsequent second and third batches hadn't been training long enough. They still needed some time to complete their training. But power armor still needs to be prepared in advance, right? Indeed. Have you considered building a dedicated arsenal? With Winter City's expansion in all aspects, the growing military also meant a growing demand for various weapons and ammunition. Tony knew his automated workshop couldn't always provide Winter City's weapons supply, so he reminded David so he could prepare in advance. Of course I've thought about it. In fact, David had not only considered it, but had even come up with a rough plan. Initially, he would build an ammunition factory so Tony wouldn't have to manage power armor, weapons, and ammunition all at once. While the automated factory at Stark Manor was highly efficient, as demand for weapons increased in both variety and quantity, it would eventually become a supply shortage. Rather than waiting until a problem arose and then hastily devising a solution, it was better to make arrangements early. First, the ammunition factory, then the gun factory and the power armor factory. As for what factories will follow, it depends on specific needs. He didn't immediately build the ammunition factory because he was waiting for Tony's new rifle. As Tony had previously explained, the new rifles used completely different ammunition than the previous ones, so he couldn't build it in advance. Just make the arrangements. According to David's plan, the new ammunition factory would primarily produce the new rifle ammunition and various functional missiles used in the power armor. A small portion of the production line would also be retained to produce the pistol ammunition currently used in Winterfell. The piano pistol would remain the primary standard handgun in Winterfell. Besides limited use by the military, its primary user was the security forces under Elizabeth Swann's leadership. Tony hadn't yet developed a pistol that used the new ammunition, so small batches of traditional gunpowder ammunition would continue to be produced. As for traditional rifle ammunition, there's no need to manufacture it. The current stockpile is sufficient for daily military training and potential emergencies. Once this batch of ammunition is exhausted, most of Winterfell's Dwarven Garand rifles can be disposed of. Whether they'll be sold at a discount to the Kingdom of Lordaeron or Stormwind Kingdom is up for discussion. After leaving Stark Manor, David and Tony chatted for a short while, practically finalizing Winterfell's future military development plan. It seemed a bit playful, but such was the power of the Lord. As long as the territory thrived, no one would question David's approach. Furthermore, Winterfell was experiencing remarkable growth under David's leadership, making it even less likely that anyone would consider David's actions inappropriate. Returning to Castle Glamorgan, David had intended to personally take Sophia on a tour of his new home to familiarize her with the area. However, upon returning, Eva reminded him that Mr. Ethan Hunt was waiting for him. "He's back, yes, have you explained the basics to him?" "Yes." David nodded and headed straight for the reception room. Ethan sat there, looking around curiously, his coffee already half finished. He seemed to have let down his guard. Seeing this, David knew Ethan had believed his earlier words. "It seems you've already understood the full situation." Ethan stood up when David entered, briefly greeting David before returning to his seat. After hearing David's words, a hint of disbelief remained on his face and in his words. "I still find this incredible. I actually encountered something that only exists in science fiction. Things in science fiction aren't necessarily impossible. Many things and objects described in science fiction become reality soon after." After a brief chat, Ethan visibly relaxed. Initially, Ethan was in complete disbelief about this miraculous event he had encountered. How could something so outrageous happen? Just walking into another world? Haha, I don't believe it. Even when David told him he could try it himself, Ethan remained skeptical, believing it was all a prank by his colleagues. It wasn't until he repeated the experiment several times that he finally confirmed that he had, perhaps, possibly, truly traveled through time. Upon returning to Winter City, he didn't see David, but instead met a woman named Eva. He sensed a military aura from her, and as she explained the situation, Ethan began to understand the extraordinary nature of this place called Winter City. It turned out that the city was home to many people like him, from other worlds, including Eva, who was providing him with basic knowledge. Everyone from these different worlds loved this place and had contributed to its development and construction. It was hard to believe that just 2 years ago, this place was a wasteland with only a few wooden houses. Now, it was a city with a complete infrastructure. Hearing this, Ethan found it absurd. But when he learned that those who, like him, had come here from other worlds also included Spider-Man, Captain America, and the Transformers, he felt that what he had just heard was nothing. This was truly outrageous. After Eva finished her general introduction, Ethan expressed his desire to meet David. By then, he knew David's identity: Lord David, Earl of Glamorgan, Lord of the city and the northern plains of the Kingdom of Tiran. After chatting for a while, Ethan inquired about Winter City, gaining a deeper understanding of this magical city. He also learned that David welcomed people like him and offered the option of settling in Winter City or building his own vacation home if he wished. "So, what do I have to pay for?" Asking him to pay for land or a house was out of the question. He simply didn't have the money of this world. He figured that since David had welcomed him, he must have some use for him. Pay. David didn't say anything like, "It depends on what you have." Given Ethan Hunter's situation, he couldn't imagine how this elite agent could be of any help. So, a simple transaction was the way to go. If you don't have money, you can find some work in Winter City. Of course, you can also buy some local specialties and sell them in Winter City. David suddenly felt that perhaps this could be done for future visitors from other worlds. Chapter 260: The Shortcomings of the Winter Legion. Winter City's current situation has seen its reliance on newcomers gradually decrease, so David can no longer share everything he has with others as he did in the early days. While a house is nothing to David, just a small gesture, he still feels it's better to establish some standards. For someone like Rick, who directly expresses his willingness to work for Winter City and serve David, it's perfectly normal for David to provide him with housing, a salary, and other benefits. However, Ethan Hunt clearly doesn't have such an intention. Currently, the ace agent simply sees Winter City as a fun getaway. He has no desire to work for David, and currently lacks the ability to contribute to Winter City. In this situation, does David have to rush to offer him benefits? What would others think if he did? Take Rick, for example. He works so hard in a zombie-infested world, searching for survivors and bolstering Winter City's population, only to be treated the same as someone who does nothing else? Why? Others like Leonard, Steve, Fording, Laura, and Helen have made significant contributions to Winter City. Transformers have even joined the city en masse, becoming residents. Even Leon, who has contributed the least to Winter City so far, introduced David to the talented Jack Krauser. Therefore, newcomers to Winter City will undoubtedly be treated differently based on their perspectives, intentions, and actions. Those willing to stay in Winter City will become residents, living and working in the city, and David will provide them with treatment tailored to their abilities. Those unwilling to reside permanently but who can contribute will also receive preferential treatment. Finally, there's Ethan's current situation. With nothing to offer and no desire to help, he can only be treated as an ordinary person. Work? Selling goods. Ethan didn't feel the need for preferential treatment. David's suggestion was perfectly reasonable, and he didn't feel he was being humiliated or scorned. He simply thought that finding a stable job here wasn't realistic for him, but he might be able to make some quick money as a small vendor. He wouldn't have to figure out what would sell well in Winter City. He could visit various shops, find out what they needed and what he could easily find, and then return to his own world to make the purchases. This kind of business, similar to overseas purchasing, should help him quickly build a fortune, allowing him to buy or build a house of his dreams in the city. In the future, this place could become his perfect vacation spot, undisturbed by any distractions, and with no one else interfering with his work. He could truly relax in Winter City. Besides, this place held so many magical treasures that would satisfy his adventurous spirit. After chatting for a while, Ethan decided to go out for a walk. Before leaving, he remembered to address an important question. Do you have any textbooks for the language you use here? When you leave, Eva will give you a tool specifically for learning the common tongue of Brunia. She'll show you how to use it. Thank you. Ethan thanked her and left the reception room. Sure enough, as soon as he left, he saw Eva, who had helped him with the introduction. He received the language learning tool from her. Wear it on your forehead while you sleep. Yes, it sounded amazing. Just wear this thing to sleep and you could learn a new language in a few days. If he could bring this thing back to his own world, it would become a hot-selling item worldwide. Putting the item away, Ethan left Castle Glamorgan and stood on the street. He decided it would be best to go back and learn the common tongue of Brunia first, then come back to explore Winterfell and find out what people here need. He's back. Yes, David nodded to Eva, understanding that Ethan's integration into Winterfell would undoubtedly take longer than others. If he was unlucky, he might not truly integrate until he married. By then, Ethan, not wanting his wife to be threatened, would likely send her to live in Winterfell. Only then would he develop a closer connection with the city. Of course, if Ethan actively integrated into Winterfell and made many friends, he could enter Winterfell's inner circle even sooner. David felt that Ethan was highly capable and possessed incredible destructive power. If possible, he would very much like Ethan to personally form and lead a special operations team dedicated to carrying out challenging missions, including but not limited to infiltration, assassination, sabotage, and kidnapping. He had yet to decide whether this special operations team would be affiliated with Edwin Van Cleef's intelligence department or with the military. Perhaps, they could answer to me directly. In that case, he could throw people like Clausa and Leon into the team, or ask Leon to lower Chris, Claire, and Jill to Winterfell. Suddenly realizing that this team's destructive power was world-destroying, David regained his composure and turned to his next task. New weapons were being finalized, a new ammunition factory was about to begin construction, and then workers needed to be recruited. These tasks needed to be established and implemented gradually. Meanwhile, the Winter Knights seemed to need some expansion. 50 was still a bit too few. The 20 recruits from earlier haven't even completed their training yet, have they? David held high expectations for the Winter Knights. In addition to the various training programs initially established, the Winter Knights had also added Paladin training. He longed for every member of the Winter Knights to be trained as Paladins. However, only Gareth Stanton and Floyd were true Paladins in the entire Winter Knights order. Becoming a Paladin will take considerable time for the remaining soldiers. But compared to the Spartan Heavy Infantry's expansion, the Winter Knights' numbers are growing too slowly. The first batch of the Spartan Heavy Infantry consisted of only 100 men, and the second batch only a mere 200, not much larger than the Winter Knights. But the third batch sent 1,000. Even if half were eventually eliminated, the Spartan Heavy Infantry's official strength would reach 800. In comparison, the Winter Knights' 50 men seem rather pitiful. Back then, Gareth Stanton had thought Wintercastle was struggling to support a few dozen knights. Now, he felt a few dozen were simply not enough. This dramatic change in thinking sometimes amused him, and he laughed at his own naivete. How many do you want to increase the number of men? 100 first. Just recruit 50 new recruits, 100 isn't a lot, and even if those 100 winter knights were equipped with the latest equipment, they wouldn't put much of a strain on Winter Castle's current logistics. No. I planned to select the best soldiers from the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment and recruit them into the Winter Knights. David was stunned before realizing Gareth's intention. But on second thought, it didn't seem to be a bad idea. For the Spartan soldiers, joining the Winter Knights seemed like a promotion. Instead of that, why not just release the news that the Winter Knights will be expanded to 100 men, with vacancies open to all of Winter City? David thought it would be better to just release the news. A little incentive might even unearth some more promising recruits. Set the requirements high. Even if we can't fill the vacancies right away, that's fine. We can observe them for a while. Gareth Stanton immediately understood the Lord's intention. He wanted to uncover talent while also stimulating the Spartan soldiers, encouraging them to train harder. They certainly wouldn't want to lose to the civilian recruits who signed up, indirectly boosting the Spartan Heavy Infantry's combat effectiveness. I understand what to do. Perhaps once the Winter Knights expansion is complete, the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment will be reborn and become one of Winter City's mainstays. Well, you, Floyd, and Jack Krauser will decide the details. David then brought up another matter. Besides expanding the Winter Knights, it would be best to recruit new recruits with talents in driving and logistics. Winter City's army currently faces a serious problem, a lack of support troops. Besides vehicle drivers, there's also a shortage of maintenance personnel, which are all shortcomings of the Winter Legion. Especially Quinjet pilots. Besides tapping internally, try recruiting from new recruits and the general public. Vehicles are a good option, but Quinjet pilots are in dire need. Right now, every Winter Knight's attack relies on Peggy, Sharon, and others to pilot them, which is not a good thing. Floyd has been looking for talents in this area and has recruited a group of people for relevant training. As the commander-in-chief of the military, Gareth was naturally aware of the problem in this area, but there was still no progress in the training of aircraft pilots, and he didn't know how to solve this problem. David could only sigh after hearing this. There were not many solutions at present. Even recruiting from other worlds would not be an easy task. Afterwards, David paid attention to the progress of the school's construction and learned that the basic framework of the school had been completed, and the diggers had gone back to pave the road from Winter City to Frostwatch and Snow Castle. Weatherby Swan brought up a new problem. With the construction and expansion of Winter City, the area of the city is slowly getting bigger. Should we consider public transportation within Winter City? Chapter 261 Winter City's chief representative in the biochemical world. Public transportation? Should we even consider that now? If it were the former governor of Port Royal, Weatherby Swan, he certainly wouldn't have cared about public transportation. Why should a bunch of ordinary people even have to worry about getting from one end of the city to the other? Most civilians lived in a small area, and walking was sufficient for most of the time. Only the nobles and officials needed to travel. But Winter City officials could readily access Cybertronian-made vehicles, making travel convenient. It seemed like public transportation wasn't necessary. However, Weatherby Swan had crammed in a lot of knowledge before becoming Winter City's administrator, and his understanding was quite good. He understood that Lord David Glamorgan didn't want a backwoods city, but a modern, advanced one. There's already a need for it. Establishing a public transportation system is relatively simple now, and it will also help everyone better accept this new thing. Winter City's territory was constantly expanding. It did take some time to travel from the northernmost point to the southernmost point, and that time would continue to increase. Considering that many people currently work in shops across the city and will soon find employment in factories, more and more people will need to commute daily. After listening to Weatherby's presentation, David realized that a public transportation system was essential. What are your ideas? Start by establishing a few basic bus routes, connecting the southernmost and northernmost areas of Winter City, as well as the easternmost and westernmost areas. We can then consider adding more routes later. Yes, David thought Weatherby's plan was very sound. With careful planning of the routes between the two lines, it would essentially ensure coverage of all areas of Winter City. We don't need large buses initially, ordinary mid-sized buses will suffice. Winter City currently has some manufacturing capabilities. For example, the transport trucks used by the Winter Legion are manufactured in-house. While the production rate is slow, it's sufficient to meet Winter City's needs. Therefore, there's no need to import these buses from another world or build a car manufacturing plant first. Let's do it. As for how many buses you need, Go talk to the alchemist directly. The vehicles currently used in Winter City are nominally manufactured by the alchemist, but you'll probably have to find the drivers yourself. Everyone Rick recruits knows how to drive. Rick has been diligently searching for survivors in his original world. To ensure Rick's safety, or to quickly resolve any problems, he often works alongside a transformer. This not only ensures Rick's own safety but also significantly increases his efficiency. After all, there are no villains in that world that can rival the Transformers. Rick's region is North America, known as the Land of Wheels. Driving is a must-have skill for almost everyone, with only a very small number of people unable to drive. Therefore, these people only need a brief training to understand the routes and work procedures before they can start work. Then let's do it. The stamp on the public transportation plan signified the Lord's official approval. Though he'd merely reviewed the details and stamped his approval, a deep sense of accomplishment filled his heart. Playing farming and construction games on the computer wasn't as fulfilling as running a real city. Satisfied, David watched Weatherby leave and waited for his next job. Unexpectedly, this time, it wasn't some Winter City official or ordinary person who came to him to offer suggestions for city development. After Weatherby left, the next person to approach him was Leon Kennedy, the man he'd previously wanted to recruit into the Special Operations team. Huh? You'd come to me out of the blue? That's strange. Leon and David had a good relationship. David had been deeply grateful to Leon for healing Leon's comrade, Jack Krauser, and for taking Krauser in at Winter City. Leon also loved Winterfell. He loved to relax there during his days off. As he put it, I don't have to worry about being disturbed when I'm on vacation here. Otherwise, every vacation is restless, always being called back on a mission. Furthermore, he would seek help when trouble struck, but not from David. Perhaps he felt that David, as Lord of Winterfell and an Earl, wouldn't have the time or energy to deal with his petty problems. So, when Leon came to David's office at Glamorgan Castle, David even wondered if something drastic had happened in the world of Resident Evil. The world has been destroyed. Leon was speechless. At David's invitation, he sat down on the sofa in the corner of the room. There was a sofa and a coffee table, convenient for David to use when he entertained guests in his office. Fresh fruit and pastries were usually placed on the coffee table, and the maids at Glamorgan Castle changed the fruit daily to ensure it was always fresh. What's up? I want to ask you something, and I might need your permission. Oh, Leon's expression was serious. David realized Leon had something important to discuss with him, so he adopted a serious expression as well, quietly waiting for his next words. Leon wasn't a politician or a businessman, and since he had a good relationship with David, he didn't beat around the bush and simply laid out his story in straightforward terms. David finally understood Leon's reason for contacting him. Leon hoped to help Shirley escape her official confinement and, if possible, send her to live in Winterfell. If it were just a small matter, Leon's visit to David would seem a bit over the top. But the real issue wasn't whether Shirley came to Winterfell, but how her current situation would change. After Leon effortlessly rescued Ashley Graham, the president's daughter, his special abilities were no longer a secret. Fortunately, the president and his immediate superiors both trusted and valued Leon, so his special abilities didn't cause him any special treatment. Even when some wanted to lock him up with Shirley for research, the president refused. However, while the president could protect Leon temporarily, he couldn't do so permanently. So, the president came up with a solution: establish a special unit, with Leon in charge. Besides protecting the president and important figures, this unit would also be responsible for handling various special incidents, currently focusing on biological and chemical incidents. Putting Leon in charge of this unit also allowed him to experiment with his special abilities. This would constitute a form of research, allowing Leon's abilities to be utilized effectively without turning him into a guinea pig. It was a proposal that everyone could accept. Leon hesitated, as he had acquired these special abilities from Winterfell and wasn't prepared to teach them to anyone without David's permission. Actually, it's not a big deal. The world of Resident Evil is rife with troublemakers. If Leon could train more powerful warriors to handle biohazard incidents, he'd be doing a great deed. Of course, every world is full of those who can pervert good advice, like the security consultant named Simmons, who wasn't a good person. From Leon's words, it seemed clear that Simmons and his group were the ones who wanted Leon to be a test subject. I think you could agree to this and use this opportunity to cultivate your own power. David couldn't help but stroke his chin. He wondered, if Leon could establish a power in the Resident Evil world that obeyed his orders completely, Using the power provided by Winter City, would that be Winter City's first step toward a dimensional invasion of the biohazard world? I don't think I have the talent for it. Leon had no objection to cultivating his own power. He had no fondness for officials or politicians, and initially became an agent out of compulsion, purely to protect Shirley. His continued service was driven more by personal connections and a sense of justice. Aside from his initial primary responsibility for the president's security, Leon's subsequent work focused on biological incidents. Having witnessed so many tragedies caused by biological weapons, he yearned to personally eliminate them and those responsible, which is why he remained committed to the front lines. People can improve through learning, and sometimes things aren't that complicated. As long as you stay true to your heart and are strong enough, you'll naturally attract like-minded people. These people who believed in Leon and were willing to follow his orders were the foundation of Leon's life in that world. He also learned something: arcane energy didn't exist in the Resident Evil world. Whenever Leon's magic power ran out, he needed to replenish it with the arcane-infused water he brought back from Winterfell. If he drank even this water, he had to return to Winterfell to replenish it. Even though he had a canteen that automatically absorbed arcane energy, he still had to come to Winterfell to absorb it. In other words, even if Leon passed on his knowledge of the arcane, he was an irreplaceable and unique being, and there was no chance of him being discarded. After clarifying the various circumstances, David believed that Leon could definitely secure more and better conditions, and that Leon's help to Winterfell and David would be even greater. Chapter 262, Contributing to Winter City. After receiving David's response, Leon returned to negotiate for better terms. David had assumed Leon and the politicians would have to dilly-dally for some time before reaching a definitive answer. However, even politicians known for their procrastination could be surprisingly efficient when faced with matters directly related to their own interests. Leon quickly received a definitive answer: he would be the head of a new department, yet to be officially named, reporting directly to the president. This department would be responsible for protecting the president and handling special incidents in North America, with biological and chemical incidents being a primary focus. Members of the new department would be drawn from various departments, giving Leon a cadre of elite personnel. Furthermore, Leon would have the right to recruit anyone he deemed qualified and suitable. To this end, Leon spent some time contacting many of his old friends, but unfortunately, few accepted his offer. Fortunately, his other request was granted. "Is this the place?" "Yes," Leon said, looking at the red-haired girl with a ponytail beside him. He had already greeted David before bringing his old comrade here. "It's a nice place here, you think so too?" "It's indeed nice." Claire, with her ponytail, looked around. Even in this city called Winter City, she could still see the beautiful natural scenery around her, the vast river, the nearby forest, the distant mountains, and the vast snowfields. "It's a little cold, though," Leon had specifically greeted her before coming over, but Claire still hadn't expected the temperature to drop so low. She almost wondered if she'd arrived in Alaska or even the Arctic Circle. "I think it's nice here," said the other blonde girl beside Leon, her eyes shining as she scanned the surroundings. She didn't care for the biting wind, and she even felt that the cold wind gave her a sense of freedom. "I'm glad you like it here." Leon and Claire looked at Shirley, her face brimming with excitement, both smiling with satisfaction. They watched as Shirley's head spun, her gaze darting back and forth. Claire deliberately slowed her pace, her voice lowered. "You actually let Shirley leave the lab? Those guys were willing to let her go? How did you do it?" Leon waved his hand, indicating he'd explain the details later. "It's not something I can explain in a few words. Let's go see Shirley's new home first." Claire knew it couldn't be explained simply, especially this place called Winter City. She didn't understand what was going on. She simply placed her hand on Leon's shoulder and followed him forward. In a flash, they were there. If she hadn't experienced it herself, she'd find it hard to believe such a miraculous thing could happen, even though she had seen plenty of strange things herself. As they walked and chatted casually, Claire learned from Leon's tales that they were now in another world. This Winter City was a new city founded only 2 years ago by David Glamorgan, Earl of the Kingdom of Tiran. Furthermore, this world possessed many magical powers and was home to many legendary races. She had just seen an elf, whose hands radiated a golden light, seemingly healing someone. Her worldview was profoundly impacted, and Claire wondered if she had entered a magical world similar to the Lord of the Rings. Before she could even ask, a police car whizzed past, sirens blaring. Claire suddenly realized that Leon was right. This matter truly couldn't be explained in a few words. This strange place alone would take ages to describe. Turning off the main road onto a narrower, but still wide, street, Claire looked around curiously. This was probably a residential area, with signs for various shops and restaurants visible. The occasional person chatted in a language she couldn't understand. After walking for a while, Claire and Shirley, led by Leon, stopped in front of a house. It was a two-story, detached building. Leon unlocked it with his key and gestured for them to enter. Shirley and Claire immediately entered. They didn't bother with Leon and immediately began to survey the interior. The first floor housed the kitchen, dining room, living room, and bathroom. The second floor held a bedroom, guest room, bathroom, and study, along with a private backyard garden. While not particularly large, it felt cozy, with all the necessary plumbing and electrical services, and even the bedding was brand new. "Is this your house?" "No, this is Shirley's," Leon replied, handing Shirley the key. "Stay here for now. If you're not satisfied, we can move later." "Oh, no. This is perfect already." Shirley found the place perfectly suited her needs, especially the proximity to the neighboring house and the proximity to many neighbors. After years of being confined in a laboratory as a test subject, Shirley appreciated this kind of popular living space. Shirley glanced at the key in her hand and her surroundings. Suddenly, a sense of unreality seized her. "Am I really going to live here?" "Yes, and no one will ever take you for any tests again." Testing was a fancy way of saying it, but it really just meant conducting various experiments. Leon had become an agent to protect Shirley, but he was powerless to prevent her from becoming a guinea pig for the scientists. If it weren't for the extraordinary powers he gained from Winterfell and used as leverage in negotiations, Shirley might have been trapped in the lab forever, a guinea pig. "Thank you, Leon." Shirley gave him a big hug and then excitedly ran upstairs to tour her new home, or perhaps to find a place to cry her heart out. Watching Shirley disappear around the corner of the stairs, Claire, happy for her, looked at Leon. "Can you explain it now?" Of course, he recounted his story in detail, finally explaining how he negotiated with the authorities to rescue Shirley. After finishing his speech, Leon extended another invitation, hoping Claire would join the new department to help him. In the past, Claire would have refused without a second thought. She was extremely distrustful of the government and, after graduating from university, she joined various grassroots groups to oppose the government, even clashing with Leon over this. Now her thoughts had changed a little, and perhaps she would seriously consider joining the new department Leon had established. Because in this new department, she would be able to better deal with the various crises caused by biological weapons, while also better protecting Shirley. As for learning magic, it was completely incidental. Well, could she also help her brother explore the way? Or perhaps ask Leon to introduce her brother to the Earl of Glamorgan? From there, she could directly learn some special abilities so that her brother Chris could better deal with various biological incidents. Especially when Claire learned from Leon that Rebecca was considering establishing a medical laboratory in Winterfell, hoping to find a way to completely eradicate the biovirus through mystical knowledge, she became increasingly inclined to accept Leon's invitation. David, well aware of Leon's dedication to Winterfell, had a relatively free moment after a series of tasks. He told Gwen he would visit her home in the next few days. Delighted, Gwen stayed home that night, overestimating her own abilities in attempting to fight David until dawn. This unexpectedly awakened a new attribute. "Do you see the huge gap between our abilities? Remember to train hard, little fountain." Gwen, whose skin was considered fair for most white people, was anything but pale at this moment. She was as red as a red chili pepper, and it took her a long time to return to her normal self. Fortunately, Gwen recovered in time. Otherwise, when David sat at Stacy's dining table, Chief Stacy's questions might not have been so cordial and friendly. The fact that he didn't pull out his gun and empty the magazine on the spot was a testament to his high character and good manners. "How old are you?" 20. David was indeed only 20 in this life, and would only turn 21 in a while. Age-wise, he and Gwen weren't much different. Of course, Chief Stacy still wasn't happy, as his daughter wasn't yet an adult. "Are you in college?" "No, I'm starting a business." "Starting a business?" "Yes, and he's already secured several rounds of investment in Europe and North America." "Oh." Chief Stacy, who had initially considered David unreliable, felt a little more credible after hearing that David had received several rounds of investment. But then, Could this guy be a playboy simply out to get women? What are your company's main businesses? Clean energy, wastewater, and waste disposal. David had originally wanted to mention land development, but fearing suspicion, he changed it to clean energy and waste disposal. These projects are still relatively new these days, and many young people are entering these industries, so it's not surprising that he's involved in this area. Crucially, Winter City already has these technologies. While the technical details aren't convenient to discuss, he can talk up the concepts, advantages, and selling points, which is more than enough to handle Director Stacy. David also emphasized that his company's primary business scope isn't North America. Plus, his British accent helped Director Stacy avoid immediate suspicion when she couldn't find anything to investigate him. He was overthinking it. Director Stacy's suspicions about him had nothing to do with whether or not she investigated his background. Chapter 263 David is free. After a rather unpleasant dinner at Gwen's house and a brief chat, David took his leave. Gwen wanted to accompany David back to Winterfell, but her father stopped her. She waved goodbye, intending to return to him after she had dealt with him. She anticipated facing a rigorous interrogation from her father, and convincing him would be a challenge. After leaving Gwen's house, David debated whether to approach Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius. This Dr. Octopus might not be so easy to recruit. Standing on the street, gazing at the skyscrapers of New York, David felt a strange feeling, a bit like recruiting unofficial warriors in his games. It went from simple clicks to more complex interactions. Getting Dr. Octopus to join Winterfell wasn't as simple as a few simple options. In this world, Dr. Octopus was backed by the Osborne Corporation, and it was unlikely he would accept David's offer until his experiment failed. Indeed, although David took some time to track down Octavius, who wasn't yet Dr. Octopus, he wasn't successful in attracting him to Winterfell. At most, he managed to leave a lasting impression. After a brief conversation with Octavius, David didn't seek out Harry Osborn, nor did he approach Peter Parker, the Spider-Man of this world. Instead, he returned directly to Winterfell. Spider-Man wouldn't be tricked into coming to Winterfell. If he simply wanted a spokesperson for this world, Gwen would be a better choice than Peter Parker. As for this world's Harry Osborn, this Harry didn't have the same inherited disease threat as the Harry of the other world, making him difficult to win over. Rather than wasting time and energy on him, it would be better to invite the Harry of the otherworldly world to Winterfell for treatment, then help him take complete control of the Osborne Corporation, ultimately allowing Osborn's technology to become Winterfell's. David didn't see his schemes as a bad thing. If all went well, he could indeed help those in need without harming anyone. His plans might even prevent tragedy. For example, Gwen from the extraordinary world shouldn't be dead. Thinking of this, David felt his approach was sound, and he began to wonder who else needed his help. Of course, he could only ponder this question in his spare time. As Winter City grew, his responsibilities grew. While Weatherby began building public transportation within Winter City and Leon diligently added to the city's infrastructure, David approached Megatron to inquire about the technology for mass-producing Decepticons. Any special requests? Megatron didn't ask David what he wanted the technology for. Instead, he asked David directly, knowing David had a specific need. Something that can transform into a Quinjet and perform simple combat missions. As David stated his request, Megatron understood why he had come to him. After the Winter Knights transitioned to their Blizzard power armor, the Quinjet was the most suitable vehicle for them. The Winter Knights, riding Quinjets, could airdrop into battle at any moment and wreak havoc, but Winter City lacked sufficient pilots, a problem Megatron had noticed after a few days of observing the Winter Army. Unable to quickly train or recruit enough pilots, David devised two solutions: have Tony install a sufficiently advanced autopilot system on the Quinjet. The other was to mass-produce Decepticons capable of transforming into Quinjets and serving as transportation for the Winter Knights. The latter was undoubtedly the superior option. Even mass-produced Decepticons possessed considerable intelligence and combat prowess, undoubtedly far superior to a rudimentary autopilot. It's not difficult, but even mass-producing Decepticons would consume a considerable amount of energy. You could ask Ratchet to help you, or ask Will for some crystal ore. Ratchet had already mastered the Holy Light, and since then, his status among Cybertronians had skyrocketed. This rise in status wasn't limited to the Autobots. Even within the Decepticons, Ratchet had gained considerable prestige. Because Ratchet can now not only repair their bodies but also restore the spark, this is of great significance to the Cybertronians. For this reason, Megatron has recently been studying the Holy Light, hoping to master this miraculous power himself. Upon learning of this, David offered Megatron guidance on how to cultivate and comprehend the Holy Light, though David remains unsure whether he can truly master it. After discussing business and teaching him about the Holy Light, David then toured the Cybertronian living quarters. Besides the increasingly well-equipped living quarters, the most prominent feature of the Cybertronian living quarters is the Cybertron Technology Center. Scientists from both Decepticons and Autobots are gathering there, collaborating on their acquired Cybertronian technology. This isn't surprising. It's common for Cybertronians to organize their technological knowledge and conduct in-depth research. However, the presence of a human scientist like Tony Stark among the Cybertronians makes him stand out. What are you doing here? Researching and learning new knowledge. Of course, Tony had recently had a bit of free time after completing a series of research projects. With the Blizzard power armor finalized, Piccolo assault rifle production underway, and ammunition being transferred to the newly constructed arsenal, Tony didn't have anything important to do. So, taking advantage of his free time, he'd headed to the Cybertronian living quarters to see what other advanced technologies the Cybertronians had in store. If David's guess was correct, after observing and learning the new knowledge and technology, Tony would begin another round of seclusion, thoroughly digesting his newfound knowledge in Winterfell and crafting a new Iron Man suit incorporating all the new technologies. He wondered what kind of suit he'd come up with. David suddenly felt a surge of anticipation. But won't Pepper be mad at you staying here all the time? Since arriving in Winterfell, Tony had spent most of his time there, only occasionally returning to his own world to make sure nothing was amiss. Pepper even had to go through Steve to get a message to Tony. It was fine for a while, but after a while, Pepper would probably explode. You're right. I really should go back for a while. Tony had previously disliked the hassle of going back and forth. After all, he'd had to rely on Steve to travel between the two worlds. Now that he'd gained the ability to travel freely, there was no need to stay in Winterfell. Before we go back, go to Castle Glamorgan and pick a golden apple. Great idea. Thanks. Tony thanked him, closed his helmet, and flew away from the Cybertron Tech Center. He figured that if he brought Pepper Potts back a golden apple, his girlfriend wouldn't be angry. After all, the golden apple's power was irresistible to any woman. David stayed at the Cybertron Tech Center for a while longer before finally getting out of his Mustang and leaving. There was no other way. The Cybertron Tech Center was built to suit the Cybertronians' builds, and it would take David longer to leave than it did for the Cybertronians. Anyway, this place was spacious enough, so it would be more convenient to just drive out. Besides, these Cybertronians usually preferred to travel in vehicles. David didn't go straight back to Castle Glamorgan. He planned to explore a bit. After all, there wasn't anything urgent to do back home. Winter School was still under construction. Although it was in its final stages, it would still take some time before the actual opening of classes. The Winter Arsenal had just begun construction, and even with the diggers, it would take more than a few days to complete the interior layout, decoration, and production lines. So, there was no rush to recruit workers. Leon had contacted him, and Rebecca Chambers was interested in coming to Winter City to establish a medical laboratory. However, the former STARS medical officer still had a lot of preparation to do beforehand, so even if all went well, it would probably be several months before she actually arrived. As for Claire and Chris's interest in coming to Winter City for further studies, that wasn't something they needed to deal with right away. So, David had really been free lately, and with nothing pressing to do, he was a little unsure what to do. Driving into the Winter Barracks, David was reminded of Gareth's earlier mention of the expansion of the Winter Knights. A while ago, it had been announced that the Winter Knights would be expanding, and that all residents of Winter City would be eligible to compete for a place in the order. He wondered what the going-on in the barracks was like. After entering the barracks, David headed straight to the training grounds, only to find them bustling with activity. Even the bitter cold couldn't dampen the frenzy. Everyone seemed consumed by a frenzy, each striving to unleash their potential. David spotted some familiar faces, Brock Rumlow, Pollux, and Castor, but also some very unfamiliar ones. And some more unexpected ones. Why is Sophia here? David glanced around and was surprised to spot Sophia in the crowd. To David's surprise, the princess was wearing Blizzard power armor. She held her helmet in one hand and raised the other to her lips, loudly cheering for a soldier in Blizzard power armor who was performing various operations. Go, Magnolia. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264 Whose equipment is more powerful? Magnolia was Princess Sophia's personal knight. Her appointment wasn't just due to her being a woman. More importantly, she was a highly skilled knight. Even within the Tiran Knights, Magnolia's prowess was widely recognized. Had she not become Her Highness's personal knight, she could easily have risen to become one of their high-ranking commanders. From a personal development and perspective, becoming Her Highness's personal knight wasn't a good choice. It practically meant she would have no future at all, her life confined to the role of Her Highness's personal knight. Promotions? Military exploits? Advancements? All of these would be elusive. The king hadn't forced her to accept the assignment. Magnolia could have refused. But she accepted it anyway, believing that as a knight, she should accept whatever missions she could, not let prospects or prosperity dictate her actions. Magnolia swore allegiance to Princess Sophia and accompanied her to Winter City, a new town located in the remotest reaches of the Kingdom of Tiran, less than 2 years after its incorporation. Before arriving in Winter City, she had prepared for hardship. After all, a new city on the remote northern frontier rarely offered the best of living conditions. Even if the Lord's quarters were slightly better, they would be given priority for the Lord of Winter and the princess. To her surprise, Winter City was completely different from her initial expectations. Clean and odorless, it featured smooth, white stone pavements, soft beds so comfortable they made it hard to get out of bed, faucets that dispensed clean water with a flick of a switch, and lights that brightened the night sky with a flick of a button. The miraculous amenities and stringent, even harsh, security regulations all underscored Winter City's unique character. As a knight, Magnolia was particularly concerned with the Winter Knights, Winter City's flagship military unit. At first, like her colleagues, she dismissed the so-called Winter Knights as merely a facade, believing them to be like most other knightly orders formed by lords. Considering that the Earl of Glamorgan had only been a noble for about a year, and his knightly order was a relatively new force, the Winter Knights seemed insignificant no matter how one looked at it. That was until she saw the Winter Knights in their heavy armor. Later, she learned that this exaggeratedly heavy armor was called Blizzard Power Armor, and that the weapon the Winter Knights used was a Garand rifle, witnessing its incredible power. From that moment on, she became curious about the Winter Knights' equipment, but she hadn't expected to experience it herself so soon. Glancing at the princess, also clad in power armor, standing nearby, she felt compelled to perform well. She must not embarrass the Tiran Knights, let alone the princess herself. Seriously recalling what Floyd had just explained, she gently performed simple movements with her hands, feeling the various conditions of her suit of power armor, called the Blizzard. Are you ready? After a few simple exercises, a nearby Cybertronian, known as a Transformer, began to urge her impatiently. Magnolia turned to glance at the Cybertronian. Although she still found this metal giant fascinating, she didn't indulge her curiosity at this moment. Instead, she simply declared, "I'm ready, go." The man reached out and grabbed Magnolia, then soared into the sky. In the blink of an eye, Magnolia was carried by the giant Cybertronian into the air. You have 10 seconds. Magnolia stood in the Cybertronian's hand, looking at the now shrinking training ground, without hesitation. Just 2 seconds later, Magnolia leaped from the Cybertronian's grasp, plummeting straight down at high speed. Wow! Very brave, the Cybertronian transformed into a giant metal bird, circling nearby. Magnolia remembered it was called an airplane. But after a few glances, she refocused her attention, adjusting her descent according to Floyd's instructions and activating the thrusters on her back. As the thrusters activated, Magnolia felt herself suddenly pause in midair, her descent slowing considerably. If she had continued in this position, she would have landed safely, but that wasn't what she wanted. As she leaped from the Cybertronian's grasp, she started the timer. The numbers on the upper left of her power armor's display were clearly visible, constantly ticking. Weaken, strengthen, weaken, strengthen. Magnolia kept manipulating the thrusters, always using them briefly to slow down when the alarm sounded, accelerating her landing just enough to ensure she wouldn't fall to her death. Finally, she managed to land safely in a short time. She immediately raised the Garand rifle she had been holding and advanced rapidly, squeezing the trigger at the targets that kept appearing around her. David watched the soldiers advancing rapidly, firing relentlessly, occasionally pausing to unleash missiles, and sauntered over to Floyd's side. Sir Floyd, who had been enjoying the spectacle, was startled to break out in a cold sweat when he suddenly noticed someone approaching him unnoticed. Turning to see it was the Lord, he finally calmed down. Floyd was already aware of David's power, so the Lord's silent presence wasn't surprising. Also, David didn't want to draw attention to himself, so Floyd kept his greeting low. Only a few nearby winter knights noticed the Lord's arrival, while the others continued to watch the spectacle. Is that Magnolia? Princess Sophia's personal knight? Yes, Floyd briefly explained the situation. Princess Sophia had come to visit the barracks with her personal knights, and during their visit, they had expressed great interest in the power armor and wanted to experience it for themselves. Floyd didn't refuse the princess's request. Furthermore, David had long ago instructed her not to be secretive about matters within Winterfell. So when Princess Sophia expressed her desire to experience power armor, Floyd immediately found her a set and personally served as the instructor. Is this a training program or a test? Both. Floyd briefly explained the procedure. According to the Winterfell Knights standards, the timer started from airborne landing safely, navigating a specific obstacle course while using various weapons to hit all targets, reaching the target location, and completing the randomly presented final missions, such as rescue and kill, all within 10 minutes to pass. Sounds like a very interesting project. Listening to Floyd's introduction and watching Magnolia's performance, David was tempted to try it out. Even as he was thinking this, Magnolia had already reached the final destination and successfully hit the target. How long? 13 minutes and 28 seconds. Floyd, who had been keeping track of the time, immediately gave a clear answer when David asked, offering further commentary. This Knight of Tiran isn't very familiar with firearms and other firearms. If she were more familiar with them, she should be able to easily complete these projects in 10 minutes. David also noticed that Magnolia's shooting either took a little longer to aim or required a few extra shots. She was also unfamiliar with the coordination of her firearms with missiles, grenades, and other weapons, requiring some time to think. Even so, she was only 3.5 minutes behind, demonstrating her formidable skills. No wonder she became the princess's personal knight. Just as David was thinking this, he suddenly saw Princess Sophia walk into the arena in her power armor and greet Thunderbolt, which had already fallen back to the ground. Before David could do anything, the Knight Magnolia rushed to Sophia's side, probably trying to dissuade her from attempting such a dangerous task. Princess Sophia walked back with a look of regret on her face, only to spot David standing next to Floyd. A smile of surprise immediately changed her face, and she ran over to David cheerfully. How is it? Doesn't it look impressive? Sophia held her helmet in one hand and her other hand on her waist. She stood before David with her head slightly raised, waiting for his praise. David smiled and praised her for a few words, then glanced at Magnolia who had followed. The knight also took off her helmet, revealing her short brown hair, and immediately saluted David, the Lord of Winter. David smiled and nodded in response, seemingly casually asking, how does the Blizzard Power Armor feel to use? This heavy armor, called the Blizzard Power Armor, is incredibly powerful. How does it compare to the equipment of the Tiran Knights? David didn't get any response from Magnolia, but the female knight's reaction gave him the answer he was looking for. It was clear that the Tiran Knights had equipment similar to the power armor, but he didn't know what it looked like. David guessed that the Tiran Knights' equipment was most likely enchanted, which enhanced combat effectiveness by adding powerful magical effects to armor, weapons, and other equipment. He wasn't sure if his guess was correct, but he was certain that the Tiran Kingdom possessed superior equipment. Chapter 265, Benefits of Being the First Investor. This was David's fourth winter since arriving in the Northern Plains, and he could now fully enjoy it. He sat in the warmth of Castle Glamorgan, sipping steaming tea, enjoying snacks and treats made from the produce of his own domain, and chatting with Laura about all sorts of random things. I heard you were planning to send people to the capital to gather intelligence. Laura peeled an orange, tasted a bite herself, and then stuffed slice after slice into David's mouth. This orange is so sour. I know you like sour things. Laura showed no sign of stopping, continuing to stuff oranges into David's mouth. Are you planning to make Winter City an independent nation, just normal intelligence gathering, despite the sour taste? He obediently opened his mouth and ate as Laura shoved the orange into his mouth. Not just information about the Kingdom of Tiran. If possible, I'd like to send intelligence officers to the surrounding countries. If it weren't for his ethnic appearance, David would even consider placing intelligence officers with the orcs and elves, but the huge difference in appearance made such a move difficult. And gathering this intelligence is also to ensure the safety of Winter City and the northern plains. David knew the Kingdom of Tiran possessed powerful equipment. He was certain of this from the reactions of Earl Sutton Stewart and Princess Sophia. The Nidus Magnolia's answer only reinforced his conviction. So, the question arose, if the Kingdom of Tiran possessed a powerful, hidden secret weapon, did the other great human kingdoms possess something similar? The Satarunma Empire's claim to the largest territory among the human kingdoms couldn't be solely due to its longevity, right? The Holy Kingdom of Gaunt was engaged in so many secret maneuvers. What was it relying on? The many gods worshipped in the temple? And what about the New Ellen Federation, formed to counter the three great powers? Was it able to withstand their attacks? If possible, David wanted to personally visit all three kingdoms to gather this information. But it was just a thought. Such a scenario was highly unrealistic. Even disregarding his identity, David, not a professional intelligence officer, would hardly have been able to uncover much useful information. It would have been a complete waste of time. Listening to David's words, Laura felt a sense of wonder. Just over a year ago, David was a mere village chief, his entire territory consisting of only a few small wooden houses. Although she had sensed David's ambitions even then, Laura felt it would take him years to achieve any significant results. How long had it been? In less than 2 years, Winter City had sprung up. The vast northern plains now considered David's domain, and he commanded a formidable army, the Winter Knights, the Spartan Heavy Infantry, and the Cybertron Legion. Laura understood that the Winter Knights were slowly increasing their numbers and equipping themselves with new weaponry, and that the Spartan Heavy Infantry, with its surge in numbers, would become a major force wielding power armor. Besides the already powerful Decepticons and Autobots, the Cybertron Legion recently began mass-producing fighters capable of transforming into Quinjet jets, providing the Winter Knights with suitable vehicles. Laura believed that as long as all these goals were achieved, David would possess enough military power to become a king. What a pity, what's wrong? David swallowed the last slice of his orange when he suddenly heard this and looked at Laura with a strange expression. What's on your mind? When you become king, you'll have more to deal with, right? David's workload was increasing. Compared to when he spent every day studying and training, only occasionally taking time out to handle official duties, David now spent a considerable amount of time on official business. Even if there wasn't any real decision-making, just receiving progress reports on various matters took up a considerable amount of time. Although Laura didn't enjoy David's constant presence like Gwen, she sometimes wished for some time alone with him. It would be even better if they could go on adventures together to special places, just like they had in the past. That's not a big deal. David reached out to rub Laura's head, but Laura swatted him away with a speechless gesture. If you want to go on an adventure with me, we can go anytime. Are you not taking care of your own territory? There's nothing I need to oversee in Winterfell right now. Even if the orcs launch an all-out attack on Snaufrest or Frostwatch, Gareth and Floyd know how to handle it. As for the construction of schools and factories, they didn't require his personal oversight as a lord. Otherwise, what was the point of appointing officials? Theoretically, David could easily delegate all the work to his subordinates. Unless it was a matter of life and death for the territory, he could ignore everything else. Besides, this is a matter of life and death for the territory. Oh, I can't let my investors be unhappy. Laura smiled and nodded, agreeing that David made sense. As one of the earliest investors in Winterfell, she was indeed entitled to certain privileges. So the question shifted from whether to find a place for the two of them to where to go. The northern plains definitely wouldn't be suitable. Winter had officially arrived, and heavy snow had already fallen, turning the entire region a blanket of white. There was nothing much to do. Leaving the northern plains and exploring other areas? Isn't that too far? That's not a good idea, is it? Have you forgotten I have a Cybertronian body? A fighter form, that's right. Using the Tomcat, the two of them could quickly leave and return to Winter City, making the distance a non-issue. That's an option. Think about other places. One of the advantages of living in Winter City and having a good relationship with David was the ability to explore other worlds besides Brenia and her own. This was exactly what Laura wanted. As time passed, More and more alien visitors arrived in Winter City, and Laura's options expanded. Just like when she was bored and could venture into the Caribbean, this time she could choose a specific destination. Azeroth, the Marvel Universe, the Resident Evil Universe, the Amazing Spider-Man Universe, the Pokemon Universe. There were already several worlds to choose from, and after careful consideration, Laura quickly ruled out most modern-day settings. The Marvel Universe, the Amazing Spider-Man Universe, the Resident Evil Universe, most of them were indistinguishable from her own world. What was the point in going there? The only places that met her adventurous needs were the Pokemon Universe and Azeroth. However, she had no interest in becoming a Pokemon trainer, so Azeroth was more fun. There were so many places and things to explore. You want to go to Azeroth? If possible, I'd actually like to experience a real-life World of Warcraft. When she was researching, Laura had played the game briefly, and after estimating the time frame, she realized that Azeroth was very close to that time frame. Oh, that's an interesting suggestion. David hadn't taken it seriously until Laura mentioned it, but now that he'd mentioned it, he realized it. Besides, he figured a trip to Azeroth would also allow him to take care of some minor matters. Anduin had been in Winterfell for a while. He couldn't let the prince live there forever, could he? Furthermore, because Fordring had returned to Lordaeron, Varian's communication with Winterfell wasn't smooth. David suspected that Varian hadn't taken Anduin back since he was sent to Winterfell because communication was currently difficult. This trip could also establish formal diplomatic relations, making it easier for Winterfell to connect with Stormwind and Lordaeron. The human kingdoms in the southern and northern parts of the eastern kingdoms would become Winterfell's allies. That's it. Let's go to Azeroth and experience the real World of Warcraft. The main business was taken care of on the side, no time wasted. It's a deal. Laura gave David a big kiss on the cheek, then happily went to get ready. David didn't call Helen or Gwen for a special visit. He and Laura had already agreed to spend time together, so of course, there was no need to call anyone else. At most, he'd call Eva in, give her a few instructions and inform her of his whereabouts. Thanks to the upgrade to his cheat code, Sylvanas, Jaina, and others had gained the ability to travel freely to and from Azeroth, so David didn't have to worry about Eva being unable to find him in an emergency. If necessary, he could have Jaina or Sylvanas travel to Azeroth and then summon David back to Winterfell via the communication device. When Laura and I get back, maybe you can take a vacation. Eva had been assisting David since arriving in Winterfell, working almost every day of the year. Now that things were back on track in Winterfell, Eva might be able to rest up. We'll talk about it when you get back. Eva didn't find it tiring. She enjoyed this fulfilling life. Besides, she figured David wouldn't be able to accompany her on vacation right after just going on a trip with Laura. In that case, it would be better to wait until another time. Then I'll make a decision after I get back. After giving instructions on various matters, David went to pack his luggage. He would be staying in Azeroth for a while this time, so he had to bring some very important equipment, such as toilet paper, shampoo, etc. Chapter 266 The Missing King. Compared to weapons and ammunition, David felt that these everyday items were essential for traveling to other worlds, especially a world like Azeroth. After packing their bags, David and Laura found Jaina, who took them to Azeroth. After a brief greeting with Fordring, Jaina used a teleportation spell to transport them to Ironforge. Have fun. Jaina chose not to travel with David and Laura. She teleported directly to Dalaran, picked up some supplies, and returned to Winterfell. David and Laura first took a quick tour of Ironforge before taking the subway to Stormwind City. This is Stormwind City. Leaving the Dwarven Quarter and standing on the canal bank, Laura observed her surroundings. She found Stormwind City less distinctive than Ironforge. It didn't seem particularly special. The only positive thing was that the cities in this world weren't as dirty and smelly. While Stormwind City had some areas with poor sanitation, it was generally clean. Are we going to see Varian next? Yes, after we finish discussing establishing diplomatic relations with Varian, we'll go to Northshire Abbey. David and Laura weren't as renowned and famous throughout Azeroth as Tiran Fordring. But after saving Quel'Thalas and helping Lordaeron fight the Scourge, David was no less of a nobody in Azeroth. While his fame in Stormwind wasn't as universal as in Quel'Thalas and Lordaeron, he was certainly known to the upper echelons of Stormwind. So, he could simply go directly to Stormwind Keep, introduce himself, and request an audience with King Varian. Normally, even if Varian didn't know David, given his current reputation, Varian would have personally met him, not to mention the fact that they already knew each other. However, things often turn out to be unexpected. After David arrived at Stormwind Keep and requested a meeting with Varian, he was not able to see the Stormwind King. Instead, he was met by Grand Duke Bolvar Fordrugan. "It's a pleasure to see you again, Duke Bolvar Fordrugan. It's a pleasure to meet you again, Baron Glamorgan. Ahem, you're an earl now. Oh, please forgive my impoliteness, Lord Glamorgan. Their last meeting wasn't a pleasant one." David had banished Bolvar back to Stormwind, so Bolvar hadn't held any fondness for David, the prophet. However, as the Duke of Stormwind, he still represented the king in meeting this powerful figure who had aided Lordaeron and the High Elven Kingdom of Quel'Therlas, and he showed due courtesy. As for the prophet he had met, David Glamorgan, who had saved Quel'Therlas and aided Lordaeron, he had learned of this from the king himself when news reached Stormwind. "I wonder if His Majesty Varian Wrynn, your majesty isn't feeling well, I see." David felt something was amiss. Varian was considered one of Azeroth's most powerful warriors, and he couldn't recall any illness the Varian king had suffered from in the storyline. After a brief, awkward chat with the Grand Duke of Stormwind, David realized that Bolvar seemed unaware of many things. At least, the Grand Duke hadn't inquired about Prince Samduin. Unable to meet Varian in person, David quickly said goodbye to the Grand Duke. "Let's go." Leaving Winterhold, David glanced back at the rather imposing castle. He realized that this trip to Azeroth might be more than just a vacation. What should we do now? Leave Stormwind first? David pondered for a few seconds, glancing into a dark corner before making a quick decision. He wasn't planning on staying in Stormwind, and his original plan of exploring the city for 2 or 3 days was abandoned. Laura didn't ask any further questions and followed David out of the city. Once outside Stormwind, they immediately turned off the main road and headed east into the forest. "We can come out now." Inside the forest, towering, dense trees obscured the sky and obscured vision, making it difficult to see what was happening in the distance. Similarly, those far away couldn't see what was happening inside the forest, offering relative safety. A sturdy man in leather armor stepped out of the shadows. His figure gradually became clearer, and he immediately spread his hands to indicate his intentions. "I apologize for meeting you this way, Lord David Glamorgan." "You are." David guessed his identity from his attire, his movements, and the fact that he had just revealed his identity, but he still needed to confirm it. "I am Matthias Shaw of SI7, seeing David nod. Matthias was certain he knew his identity and knew they could get down to business. Before he could speak, David asked, "What's the situation with His Majesty Varian Wrynn? His Majesty has disappeared." "Huh?" David looked at Matthias in surprise. The SI7 leader's expression wasn't particularly good, and his expression, filled with self-blame, made David realize that Stormwind's crisis hadn't been resolved much. What exactly is going on? Matthias didn't hide anything from David. Compared to Bolvar Fordrugan, the intelligence chief, Matthias knew more. In addition to the king's specific dispatch of Prince Samduin to the Earl's domain, the details also included numerous details of David's activities in the northern part of the continent. Matthias knew David before him to be an incredibly powerful wielder of the light, even hailed as the Light's incarnation by the High Elves of Quel'Therlas and the Knights of the Silver Hand. With King Varian Wrynn missing and undercurrents swirling within Stormwind, Matthias was unsure what to do. David's arrival in Stormwind provided him with a source of assistance. Matthias immediately sought out David, and upon his inquiry, he promptly explained the situation in detail. Upon discovering the turmoil within Stormwind, Varian had sent Anduin to Winterfell, a fact largely unknown to Matthias alone. Varian subsequently began operating under a disguise within Stormwind territory. While in Elwyn Forest, everything went smoothly. Despite uncovering numerous issues, Varian maintained constant contact with MI7, and the king gradually sorted out the situation, seemingly understanding what to do. But after following the clues all the way to Westfall, things started to go wrong. His Majesty had even vanished recently. Before his disappearance, His Majesty was investigating Edwin Van Cleef. Who? Edwin Van Cleef, David wanted to say. That's impossible. Edwin Van Cleef was currently in Winterfell, serving as its intelligence chief. How could he have the time to stir up trouble in Westfall? But then it occurred to him that much of Stormwind's troubles were being caused by the Black Dragon Onyxia. Although Fordring had exposed her identity and could no longer hide within Stormwind as Katrana pressed her, that didn't mean she couldn't continue causing trouble. After all, Fordring had only expelled Onyxia from Stormwind, not killed the Black Dragon Princess. So, Could this reappearing Van Cleef be a disguised version of the Black Dragon Princess? Or perhaps it was a fake specifically promoted by the Black Dragon Princess, and Varian was likely captured by the Black Dragon Princess while pursuing this lead? What do you know about this Van Cleef? I know this Van Cleef is a fake. Matthias bluntly stated that he knew the real Van Cleef had gone to Winterfell, and that the Van Cleef currently commanding the Defias Brotherhood to wreak havoc in Westfall and Elwyn Forest, even infiltrating Duskwood, was not the real Van Cleef. What else? His whereabouts are very secretive. Even those within the Defias Brotherhood don't know where he usually stays. Matthias went on a saga, but ultimately yielded little useful information. One thing is certain, he's in Westfall. David shook his head speechlessly. He didn't know how to evaluate the intelligence officers of MI7. They could indeed find important information and uncover the truth, but they were always a step behind. When things were so confusing and unclear which direction to investigate, they were of little help. I'll go to Westfall myself and take a look. He didn't expect to get any more information. He and Laura had no clear purpose anyway, so he might as well just help find Varian's whereabouts. Lord Glamorgan, Matthias quickly called to David, saying he had something else to say. His Royal Highness, he's doing well in Winterfell, learning new things every day. That wasn't what Matthias wanted to say. He wanted David to bring Prince Anduin back to Stormwind before he went to search for the king. However, there were some things he couldn't say directly, and he didn't have the authority to make such a request. He had hoped David would initiate this, but it looked like David didn't want Anduin to return to Stormwind at this time. David really didn't want Anduin to return unless he was certain Varian was dead and Stormwind needed a new king. Otherwise, what would Anduin do? He could do nothing, and would be of no help in the search for Varian. He would just be a decoration in Stormwind. I will bring your king back as soon as possible. Chapter 267, Priests also want to brush the death mine. David and Laura left the forest and returned to the main road. Following this road south, they would soon reach Goldshire, a crucial transportation hub in Elwyn Forest. Its location made Goldshire a bustling town. If David had followed his original plan, he and Laura would have begun their journey in Elwyn Forest, experiencing the real-life version of World of Warcraft. They would have settled in Goldshire, taking on quests and earning rewards like ordinary adventurers, experiencing the life of a true adventurer. What's next? Go to Goldshire to buy 2 horses and head to Westfall. No, if David truly needed mounts, he would have mentioned it to Matthias earlier. As the leader of MI7, it wouldn't be difficult for him to arrange horses and supplies for David and Laura. David didn't mention it, as he didn't need a mount. Let's finish this business first. Perhaps we'll have enough time to explore this world. David transformed into his Cybertronian form, releasing his Tomcat. After climbing into the cockpit with Laura, the black Tomcat soared into the sky, needing no runway or other assistance. After a simple adjustment, it headed directly towards the Westfalls. High in the air, David wasn't worried about losing his bearings, as the territories of Stormwind Kingdom were quite distinctive, especially the area known as the Westfalls. Its ochre-colored hue contrasted sharply with the lush greenery of the surrounding Elwyn Forest and Duskwood. Flying at high speed, David quickly reached the skies above the Westfalls. Laura, seated in the back, looked down curiously. From high above, the Westfalls lacked dense forests. The few trees that could be seen were sparse, lacking lush branches and leaves. At first glance, it seemed a desolate, barren land. However, the Westfalls were, in fact, richly fertile, lacking many tall trees. This was simply due to their unique geographical location. Speaking of vegetation alone, the overgrown Westfalls were anything but desolate. Where do you plan to start? The dead means, of course, knowing the plot, the two couldn't follow the usual adventurer's path of slowly gathering clues from the outer reaches. Nor did they need to go to Sentinel Hill and learn about the Defias Brotherhood through the local Westfall People's Army. David flew for a while, then, upon finding Moonbrook, he directly descended toward the ground. He didn't need to stop the plane, he simply slowed down enough and, upon approaching the ground, he simply jumped out of the cockpit. The Tomcat made a semicircle in the air, gradually shrinking and returning to David's body. By then, the two were surrounded by several Defias Brotherhood members. Who are you? What was that giant bird? Could it be a druid, human druid? A group of men wearing red masks stared warily at David and Laura, holding various weapons, while some held their bare hands in fighting stances. Seeing the young couple show no sign of speaking, The defiant bandits exchanged glances before charging forward. A sudden flash of golden holy light struck a defiant Brotherhood member to the ground. Seeing this, the others nearby cried out in surprise, "Holy light!" As bad guys, their biggest fear was encountering a holy light user. If the two before them were paladins, they would have no chance of defeating them. Just as they were panicking, unsure whether to charge forward, someone with more insight shouted, "That's a holy light priest using smite, not a paladin." Upon hearing this, everyone, having slowed down slightly, sped up again, and in the blink of an eye, they were in front of David and Laura. After David used smite to knock down a bandit, he was surprised to find that the bandit mistook him for a weak priest and charged even harder. "That's good. Let's take them all down." Seeing the group rushing towards him, David unleashed his rarely used Holy Nova. This was once again a holy light spell, a specialty of holy light priests, one of their few offensive spells, and most importantly, a group attack. With David at the center, holy light continuously emanated from the surrounding area, bombarding the defiant bandits, instantly sending them flying back to their original positions. However, unlike before, when they had stood there with their heads held high, questioning David's identity, they now lay obediently on the ground, completely lifeless. David showed no mercy against these scumbags, and would strike without holding back. Before Edwin Van Cleef had journeyed to Winterfell, he had already expelled the defiant Brotherhood's artisans from the group. Even those who refused to go to Winterfell had left the defiant Brotherhood. This meant that the remaining defiant Brotherhood members were all bandits, thugs, and other scum. There was no good person left in the entire Brotherhood. Looking around, despite David's impressive presence, more defiant Brotherhood members were emerging from the various houses. Most were just ordinary humans. While they were strong and looked fierce, David took them in stride. What caught his attention was the fact that there were actually several mages among the group. That's quite unusual. This wasn't a game. A small bandit gang had mages, warlocks, priests, and everything in between. The real defiant Brotherhood simply couldn't attract such high-ranking mages to join. Therefore, the presence of these mages was clearly problematic. Although David was completely confident and could cheat if necessary, he cautiously cast a layer of holy light on himself before charging at one of the mages. He felt that the easiest way to find out what was going on was to attack them. Laura was no slow in her movements, casting a shield herself as well. With her left hand, she drew her hunting bow, which had been upgraded countless times. With her right hand, she quickly drew the string and unleashed a holy light shot, killing the defiant bandit who stood in David's way. Seeing David charging straight at him, and the men who had stood in his way instantly slain by the enemy hunter, the mage, startled, immediately unleashed a defensive spell, enveloping himself in a thick layer of ice. To his surprise, David, upon witnessing this, not only didn't slow down, but instead sped up. In an instant, he had reached the mage, who was now protected by the thick ice, and delivered a powerful kick. The massive block of ice encasing the mage was sent flying by David, flying through the air for over 10 meters, killing countless defiant bandits along the way. It bounced heavily on the streets of Moonbrook before collapsing and rolling several meters before coming to rest. The scene was terrifying. Those around him had never seen or even heard of anything like it. Not only was the mage, still encased in the ice, stunned, but so were the two other mages standing beside him. Just as the two mages were stunned, one was struck by a massive pillar of fire that descended from nowhere. David, having unleashed his holy light hunter, pulled the trigger at the other mage. Bang! Since the holy light hunter had been crafted and became David's weapon, this was his first time using it. The scene was quite stunning. From the mage's chest upwards, the entire area was evenly smeared across the ground of Moonbrook Town. Unfortunately, it wasn't spread over the surrounding farmland, as that seemed a waste. Just when David thought he could properly interrogate the mage who had been kicked out of the battlefield prematurely, he suddenly sensed something amiss. The mage struck by the holy light hadn't died. I see. No wonder there's a mage here. A violent aura emanated from his side. David turned around and saw a massive figure burst out from the fading flames. Covered in black scales, it had the lower half of a giant lizard and the upper body of a human. His 4 sturdy legs gave him incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of David, swinging his massive fist, larger than many heads, straight at him. However, the black dragonman had no chance to throw his fist back. The next second, he was pierced through the head by the golden spear in David's hand. Seeing the black dragonman fall before him, David pulled out his golden spear and casually flung it twice. The water that suddenly swirled from the tip of the spear washed away the remaining blood. If the mages are all dragonmen in disguise, I'm afraid we won't be able to extract any information from them. These dragonmen must be Onyxia's minions. They are absolutely loyal to her and cannot be defeated by torture. Watching the imposter mage emerge from the ice in the distance and prepare to return to his true form, David raised his holy light hunter and shot him dead just as he was about to reveal his true form. David turned back, making sure the dragonmen were completely dead. Laura had already wiped out the remaining defiant bandits. These ordinary bandits posed no threat to Laura at that moment. Even in a direct battle within a small area, Laura could still easily wipe them out. The dead means has probably become a black dragon's lair. Isn't that perfect? Haven't you always wanted a dragon? Chapter 268, The Black Dragon Princess reports someone cheating. In casual conversation, David had mentioned how he'd longed to farm for Onyxia's reigns, but never found one. Later, after Winterfell was founded, he'd mentioned how a few dragons would be even more fitting. But those were just casual jokes, and David hadn't expected Laura to bring it up at this moment. You mean capturing a few black dragons and bringing them back to Winterfell? Maybe there's a chance I can make up for your past regrets. I don't think it's likely. How could he make up for his regrets? Simply capture Onyxia and use her as a mount? This black dragon wouldn't likely willingly accept being a human's mount. Even if Onyxia agreed, David worried she'd wander into Winterfell and cause trouble. Ever since Deathwing's insanity, few black dragons were still alive. Even if there were some special way to control Onyxia, David worried she'd suddenly go mad. Compared to that mother dragon, why not capture a few dragonlings and raise them? Catching a pet wouldn't be so bad. Anyway, David and Laura entered the mines together, wandering around for a while before finally finding the correct dungeon entrance. This was the real world, so naturally, there were no giant, whirlpool-like dungeon gates. The mines themselves were also much larger and more complex than in the game, so the dead means were well hidden. It took David some time to find the correct path. How did he know he was on the right path? As David and Laura continued to go deeper, they gradually lost sight of the ordinary defiant bandits. More and more dragonkin disguised as mages and warriors appeared before them. When things got tough, these dragonkin would quickly reveal their true forms. David watched as more and more dragonkin appeared. After a while, he even saw undisguised dragonkin and black dragonkin flapping their wings and spitting fireballs at him. He knew he was on the right path. It's difficult. I just tried, but these young dragons can't communicate at all. Laura's bow and arrows barely stopped firing. Each arrow could kill an enemy, and after clearing a group of enemies, she could recycle her arrows, meaning she never had to worry about running out of arrows. Even if Laura ran out of arrows, she needn't worry, she still had other weapons in her storage. David wielded a light hunter in one hand and a hammer of judgment in the other. He had put away his spear, as it wasn't very effective in environments like mines and caves. Of course, with David's current strength, he could easily dispatch the group of dragonkin before him even with his bare hands. These minions of Onyxia posed no threat to him at all, and he could even use them to test out any impromptu moves he'd come up with. 100 ripping kicks, he kicked a larger and more powerful dragonkin, pinning it to the wall and unable to get down. David practically crushed it into pulp before retracting his right foot, still radiating a golden glow. Just as he was about to say something to Laura, he suddenly spotted the enemy in stealth. Drop. Laura moved quickly. With absolute trust in David, she obeyed immediately. Almost as Laura crouched, David's outstretched left palm unleashed a vast ball of holy light, sending the nearly invisible figure behind Laura flying. What's that move called? Laura turned and glanced at the figure being sent flying. She wasn't particularly concerned with the figure's condition, but instead wondered who David had just imitated. It's nothing more than gathering holy light into a ball and releasing it. If she had to give it a name, it could be called Holy Light Blast, or even Holy Light Wave Fist. David frowned, then stamped his foot on the ground without waiting for Laura to question. Consecration. This Paladin's preferred group attack, one David mastered, was particularly effective against stealthed enemies. Sure enough, after David used Consecration, flooding the ground beneath his feet with holy light, suffusing the area centered on him with holy light, stealth enemies were no longer able to maintain their stealth. They were forced to reveal themselves, and to David's surprise, they all resembled Edwin Van Cleave. David now understood why Varian and SI-7 had been unable to uncover any useful information. There were countless Edwin Van Cleefs in the West Walls. Such a large number of Van Cleefs could easily mislead investigators and conceal more important information. Bang! 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 As several Van Cleefs were forced to reveal themselves, Laura had already sheathed her bow and arrows and unsheathed 2 piano pistols, unleashing a furious barrage of ammunition on the imposter Van Cleefs beside her. The magazines crafted by Pierre Newton ensured the 2 silver piano pistols maintained sufficient sustained firepower. Combined with the powerful ammunition, the imposter Van Cleefs were quickly reduced to shreds, their bruises scattered unevenly across the mine floor. The lucky guy, who wasn't being cared for by Laura, still had no chance of reaching her. David's Avenger's hammer hurled him through the head, sending him crashing to the ground. Though one leg still throbbed, he was clearly dead. Keep going. I think we're not far from our target. He wasn't sure if Varian was actually there, but he figured with so many black dragons swarming within the dead means, even if he couldn't find Varian, he could still find some useful clues. David's prediction proved true. After entering the deepest part of the dead means, he indeed encountered Varian. He was a bit surprised to find 2 Varians before him. 2 identical Varians stood within a massive magic circle, emitting a powerful arcane light that was not only blinding but also trapped the 2 within, preventing them from leaving its perimeter. David observed carefully for a moment. Although he had no particular knowledge of arcane magic, he could pinpoint the energy nodes. He only needed to destroy the energy nodes that maintained the magic circle, and the circle would naturally cease functioning. After scouting several locations, David hurled the Hammer of Judgment. Embodied with immense holy light power, it bounced accurately off several energy nodes, returning to David's hand upon completion. As crucial energy nodes were destroyed, the arcane radiance gradually faded until it vanished. The 2 Varians trapped within the magic circle magically merged into one. Looking at the unconscious Varian before him, David unleashed a massive burst of holy light, restoring him to peak condition and successfully awakening him. Varian opened his eyes and looked at David, a bit dazed, seemingly unsure of what was happening. Where am I? It's me. You're deep in the dead means. What's the last thing you remember? I remember investigating the Defius Brotherhood in the West Falls. Hiss. Varian felt a throbbing pain in his head, followed by a flurry of fragmented images. I've been captured? It's Onyxia, that damn black dragon. She seems to have cast some kind of spell on me. David's continuous use of holy light healing, coupled with Varian's pain-ridden contemplation and recollection, finally brought everything together. Varian had indeed been captured here by the Black Dragon Onyxia, and the group of fake Van Cleefs and the increasingly rampant Defius Brotherhood were also Onyxia's work. Onyxia even openly shared her plan with Varian. She planned to use magic to split Varian into 2. One Varian would be a combination of timid, cowardly, and hesitant, obsessed with pleasure and unwilling to handle affairs. The other, with its bold, shrewd, and powerful personality, would reside in the other. Onyxia's goal was to send the timid Varian back to Stormwind, while the shrewd and powerful Varian would be killed. However, Onyxia underestimated Varian's willpower. The splitting magic failed to completely separate him immediately, so she trapped him in a magic circle, hoping to wear him down over time until his willpower collapsed and he could no longer resist the splitting magic. Then, she would proceed with her plan. Varian's confusion and inability to remember certain things were due to the magic. Just as Varian was beginning to succumb to the magic's influence and was about to split completely into 2, Onyxia was about to do so. David appeared and destroyed the magic circle, completely thwarting Onyxia's plan. Varian, his thoughts gradually returning to normal, explained the entire situation and thanked David. We'll talk more later. David looked up and saw a dark-haired woman in a burgundy robe glaring at him angrily. There are more pressing matters to address first. Despicable black dragon. Varian, also seeing Onyxia in her human form, immediately stood up and reached for his waist, but found nothing. He then looked around, searching for 2 suitable weapons. Before Varian could find a suitable weapon, Onyxia, whose face was filled with rage and undisguised murderous intent, suddenly changed expression after a 2-second standoff with David. She cast her teleport spell and disappeared from everyone's sight. David looked at the place where Onyxia had disappeared, puzzled, completely confused as to why she had suddenly fled. Did she discover my cheating? Chapter 269 Titan. Why had Onyxia suddenly run away? Did she receive some unexpected news? Or did she sense something was amiss? Could it be that she'd discovered David had used his special privileges and, knowing she couldn't defeat him, she'd quickly fled? Unless Aniksha was captured, neither David nor Varian could get a definitive answer. Let's forget about the dragonette for now. Let's get out of here. Having successfully found Varian, David could now enjoy his time alone with Laura, experiencing the real-life version of World of Warcraft. However, he was surprised to find that Varian had no intention of returning to Stormwind, and instead invited David to join him in monster hunting in Westfall. We're here to experience these things anyway, so there's nothing wrong with that. Since Laura didn't mind, David agreed. He and Varian formed an adventuring team, taking on all sorts of quests in Westfall. They were willing to accept any and all quests, no matter how big or small, and especially those issued by the Westfall People's Army specifically targeting the Defias Brotherhood, which they took on without a second thought. After the three men's efforts, less than 10 days had passed since they emerged from the dead means, and virtually no trace of the Defias Brotherhood could be found in Westfall. While they couldn't completely wipe out such a massive organization in such a short time, it was certainly not difficult to terrify the bandits, making them afraid to commit crimes. While it wouldn't completely change the dire situation in Westfall, it would at least alleviate it. It's been hard to see those Defias bandits out there lately, David said, glancing around as he ate his stew by the campfire. They were sitting in a sheltered spot at the foot of a mountain. The mines nearby were deathly silent. They had once been occupied by the Defias Brotherhood, but they had recently suffered a series of heavy losses, forcing them to abandon even their most prominent strongholds. This will at least alleviate the dire situation in Westfall. Varian poked the campfire with his stick. As the king of Stormwind, he was now left with only this method to protect his people, which annoyed him greatly. In reality, the problems in Westfall weren't particularly serious. They were merely a bunch of bandits and thugs, easily suppressed by a properly trained militia. However, Stormwind Kingdom hadn't completely resolved its problems. Besides the apathy of the upper nobility, there was another reason: lack of funds. It wasn't the nobility's lack of funds, but King Varian's. If Varian had sufficient funds, even if he did nothing, simply providing the Westfall People's Army with weapons and supplies and sending a few instructors and commanders, he could quickly restore peace to Westfall. But with no money now, Varian racked his brains, unable to come up with a good solution. Do you have any suggestions, me? Yes, you've become the Lord of Winterfell and rule a vast territory. During their adventures together, Varian had learned that David's territory was no longer just a small village, it even controlled much more land. As a ruler himself, Varian was curious about how David governed his territory. Perhaps he could offer some valuable lessons. Our situation is different. David held absolute control over his domain, and all armed forces within it obeyed his orders. Varian's immense headaches were a thing David wouldn't have to face. If David were in Varian's shoes, facing the various dilemmas he faced, he wouldn't be able to devise a suitable solution. Perhaps he would ultimately use his immense supernatural power to crush everyone, annihilating those who refused to obey or hindered his progress. Even then, there was still a problem to be solved. Westfall, Redridge Mountains, and Duskwood all had their own lords, and Varian couldn't simply overstep his authority to govern them. This system of feudalization severely restricted Varian, and he truly couldn't devise any solution. David looked at Varian, who looked constipated, and thought of Anduin. That prince of Stormwind Kingdom spent his days in Winterfell studying a wide variety of subjects and reading a wide variety of books. He also constantly heard various opinions from him. He wondered what impact his return would have on Stormwind Kingdom. If His Royal Highness declared his intention to abolish the ancestral law, what a spectacular scene would Stormwind City witness? I suddenly feel like being there to witness the excitement. Varian, unaware that David's mind was preoccupied with watching the excitement, shifted the conversation to David's domains despite failing to elicit any solutions from him. Compared to his last casual glance, this time Varian could ask more. For example, how did David plan Wintercity? How did he plan to continue developing Wintercity and the surrounding territories? What policies did David implement in his own domains? Could he apply these policies to Stormwind? The more he asked, the more curious Varian became about Wintercity, leading him to discuss the diplomatic relations between the two kingdoms. Since Varian couldn't think of a suitable candidate to serve as Stormwind's permanent diplomat in Wintercity, David simply gave Varian a pass token, allowing him to travel freely between the two worlds. This also allowed him to visit his son whenever he pleased. After explaining the token's function and usage, and watching Varian carefully put his belongings away, David prepared to say goodbye. "Aren't you going to Stormwind for a while?" Varian was already preparing to return to Stormwind, having originally planned to invite David and Laura to visit. Judging by David's expression, he seemed to want to continue exploring with Laura. "No, Laura and I are going to Duskwood. From Westfall, one could go directly to Duskwood, then head south to Stranglethorn Vale or east to Redridge Mountains, depending on their preferences at the time." "Well, have a pleasant journey, both of you." As the sun gradually rose, the makeshift three-person team disbanded. With a token in hand, Varian could return to Winterfell to join David at any time, so there was no sense of parting. After parting ways with Varian, David and Laura finally began their adventure together. They didn't use their tomcats or even their mustangs. Like ordinary adventurers in this world, they journeyed to Duskwood on foot, slaying undead creatures along the way. Laura also experienced the fighting power of werewolves and ogres, only to find them completely weak and no match for her. If this trip weren't for travel, she would even want to see the Emerald Dragon. Speaking of dragons, what's with that black dragon? I don't know. Laura had noticed something, so it was impossible for David not to have noticed. Ever since parting with Varian, David had noticed someone spying on him, and he quickly realized it was the black dragon Aniksha. However, as soon as he paid attention to it, the black dragon would immediately flee. Then, after a while, it would reappear, lurking in the shadows again, only to catch David's attention and disappear again. After repeating this over and over again, David grew annoyed. He vaguely suspected that the black dragon might have sensed something and misunderstood him, otherwise, there was no way to explain its behavior. But even when he tried to question it, the black dragon wouldn't give him a chance, and he gradually stopped paying attention to it. After a few days in Duskwood, David and Laura didn't head to Stranglethorn Vale, but instead followed the main road to Redridge Mountains, eventually stopping in Lakeside. Instead of continuing to take on commissions like ordinary adventurers, they rested in Lakeside for a few days before leaving Azeroth. They had been in Azeroth for over a month, a time Laura felt was long. David's ability to spare such time, simply to spend time with her, was deeply satisfying, both physically and mentally. Furthermore, Laura wasn't one for clinging to men, so upon returning to Winterfell, she readily left David behind. Watching Laura, who had vanished with a wink, David felt a strange feeling in his heart. It seemed as if it would have been more appropriate to hold on to a few banknotes in this situation. Meanwhile, in Azeroth, Aniksha, unaware of David's current situation, stared at the spot where David and Laura had vanished, her brow furrowed in thought. Why does this man exude the aura of a titan? Aniksha seriously doubted her judgment. After all, she had never actually seen a titan, nor felt their power. But strangely, a voice, as if from the depths of her soul, kept reminding her, there's no doubt, it's indeed a titan. David, having been identified by Aniksha as a titan, adjusted his mindset and immediately got back to work. After over a month away, he wondered if anything significant had occurred in Winter City. Returning to his office at Castle Glamorgan, Eva reported everything. To David's surprise, Winter City remained relatively unscathed, but the Kingdom of Tiran was in trouble. Rebellions broke out in the southwestern and eastern regions of Tiran, with several lords declaring independence from Tiran's rule. Chapter 270, War breaks out. A Lord Rebellion. In all the information he'd heard, the Kingdom of Tiran had always been portrayed as a rising power. Rebellions, like these, usually only occur after development reaches a bottleneck and internal conflicts accumulate, right? As Eva explained, David was surprised to discover that this rebellion was actually connected to him and Winter City. Huh? How does it connect to me? Eva continued to explain, and David finally understood why the rebellions in the southwestern and eastern regions of Tiran were connected to him. While the cause of these lords' rebellion remained unclear, the key trigger was the order for forced population relocation. Compared to the relatively sparsely populated northern part of the kingdom, the southern and eastern parts of Tiran had a larger population, resulting in a greater number of young and unemployed people. Tiran's population relocation primarily involved conscripting men from these areas. Normally, this wouldn't be a big deal. Relocating these unemployed and redundant people would also alleviate public security issues, and most lords had no objection. But it just so happened that a few lords were secretly making certain preparations. These young and strong people were a resource they valued greatly. In fact, Some of the young and strong people targeted were originally specially nurtured by these lords. If they were relocated, wouldn't their efforts be in vain? This also raised another question. Could His Majesty's sudden forced relocation of the young and strong people have been due to his awareness of something? So, I understand. These lords were already preparing for rebellion, and the order to relocate the population simply ignited this powder keg. As for why these lords rebelled? Was there any force behind them? It was obvious. It seems that the Holy Gaunt Kingdom isn't the only one causing trouble in the Kingdom of Tiran. The southwestern region of the Kingdom of Tiran borders the Holy Gaunt Kingdom. The rebellious lords must have already colluded with the Holy Gaunt Kingdom, or rather, with the Holy Temple. But those to the east are a bit further away. Their rebellion, so swiftly and decisively, must have backing. Naturally, the nearby Thordarinmer Empire is a major suspect. These events are far from Winter City. Unless the Kingdom of Tiran is in dire crisis and His Majesty issues a nationwide call for troops, commanding the Earl of Glamorgan to fulfill his duty and bring his troops to support His Majesty, suppressing the rebellion in the kingdom has nothing to do with him. As Lord of the Northern Plains of Tiran and Guardian of the Northern Frontier, David's responsibility is to protect Iran's northern territories. With the Northern Plains threatened by orcs, he simply needs to ensure the orcs cannot enter Tiran territory, and he'll have accomplished his mission. Speaking of orcs, Eva also reported on their movements. Although their plans to build a frontier fortress were previously thwarted by the triple transformers Lightning and Shatter, the orcs still covet Snowfrost and Frostwatch. They even attempted a surprise attack on Frostwatch not long ago, but were repelled by the defenders. Did we suffer any casualties? No. After realizing the formidable defenses of Frostwatch, making a successful surprise attack impossible, the orcs retreated, even retreating to the easternmost reaches of the northern plains. It seemed the orcs wouldn't be invading Winterfell's territory anytime soon. David then inquired about other matters. The school had been completed, and the scheduled opening date was not far away. The notice requiring all eligible young people in Winterfell's territory to attend had already been issued. The people of Winterfell hadn't reacted particularly strongly to this, perhaps simply not understanding the implications of all this. Winterfell's internal public transportation system had been established, with several buses now operating throughout the city. Rebecca Chambers had recently visited Winterfell, apparently to select a suitable location for a medical laboratory. Chris and Claire had intended to visit David, but he was out, so they missed the opportunity. However, Chris occasionally visited the Winterfell barracks. The first batch of Piccolo assault rifles had been produced, and the Winterfell Legion could begin upgrading to the new rifles. The arsenal is still under construction, and mass production of ammunition will take some time to truly begin. Currently, the ammunition still requires Tony Stark's automated production line. Production of the Decepticon Twinjet has begun, with 2 already built and the goal of 10 soon to be reached. Ethan has started a purchasing agency business in Winterfell, and it seems he'll soon earn enough to buy a house. Reporting all the big and small matters was no easy task. Eva worked until the next morning to finish her account of the various details. Where are my shoes? After finishing her work, Eva searched around for them, and David found them for her in the crack at the head of the bed. Wouldn't you like to rest more? I feel better and better. Even a night without sleep won't hurt. Your body isn't strong enough to not need rest yet. It's best to maintain your usual routine. I take a regular rest every afternoon. Watching Eva happily go about her work, David began to wonder what he would do during this time. Aside from attending the Winter Academy opening ceremony, he seemed to have no more personal duties to attend to. He simply listened to Eva's reports regularly and kept abreast of Winter City's developments. Indeed, for a period of time afterward, aside from attending the Winter Academy opening ceremony and delivering a speech, David mostly focused on his own affairs. He ran dungeons, spent time with Laura and Helen, chatted with Eva about work and personal matters, gave Gwen combat tips, and took Sophia on tours of Winter City. In his occasional free time, he either honed his skills or practiced alchemy. The vibranium sample obtained from Steve and Tony was his primary analysis target during this time. Furthermore, David had also merged the Tomcat with the Mustang, a process that went smoothly. David quickly merged the 2 bodies into one, transforming them into a single form, the Mustang, the Tomcat, and a humanoid form. In this state, David was a true triple transformer leader. After analyzing vibranium, David began experimenting with infusing a Cybertronian body with vibranium. Success would make it even stronger and more durable. David wasn't sure how long it would take, but he had some free time, so he decided to work on it. He planned to enhance all his weapons and equipment with vibranium once his Cybertronian body was complete. If he grew tired of alchemy, he'd go dungeon hunting monsters and try to find any rare materials. But even at nightmare difficulty, he still hadn't found any particularly good materials. Even the relatively common, hellish leather and ore were scarce, and he mostly gave them to Pierre, the old alchemist, to study. In contrast, Gwen and Helen could regularly produce something rare, which left David speechless. Winter slowly passed amidst these peaceful and comfortable days. This was the most comfortable and least winter-like winter David had experienced since arriving in the northern plains. Unlike previous frequent blizzards, this year's snowfall was minimal, with only 2 heavy snowfalls at the beginning of winter. Not only did no larger blizzards fall later, but even the accumulated snow began to melt early. As the temperature gradually warmed, the deals initially negotiated with Iron Tree Keep began to be completed, and a large number of young and strong people began to arrive in Winter City. Even the first batch of forced relocations arrived in the northern plains. The capital sent messengers to remind David to prepare for the large influx of newcomers. David, of course, had already made preparations. The new arrivals were still arranged according to the existing rules. The diggers and craftsmen were busy again. The previously empty areas of Winter City were slowly being filled with new houses, and David looked forward to the day when these houses would be filled. More people, more young people, more students, more soldiers. David vaguely envisioned Winter City developing into a advanced city with vast territory, advanced facilities, and an innumerable population. Just as he was happily anticipating all this, Vanessa Van Cleef brought him some bad news. Are you saying Iron Tree Fort is at war? Due to its location on the northern plains, Iron Tree Fort serves as a crucial gateway connecting Winter City to the interior of the Kingdom of Tiran. The sudden onslaught on Iron Tree Fort means that the young and strong population of Tiran, planning to migrate to Winter City, are unable to make it. Who is Iron Tree Fort at war with? Are there lords around Iron Tree Fort rebelling? David was puzzled. The greatest threat to the entire north is the orcs. Now that they've been stopped, who else would attack Iron Tree Fort? It's the elves of the Iron Tree Forest who are at war with Iron Tree Fort. It seems the elves suddenly launched an attack on Iron Tree Fort. Vanessa's answer shocked David. He had grown up in Iron Tree Fort his entire life and was well aware of the feud between the elves of the Iron Tree Forest and Iron Tree Fort. The relationship between the two sides was self-evident. The key point was that these elves had been constantly beaten and unable to fight back, so they could only sneak around and cause trouble for the humans of Iron Tree Fort. The power gap between the two sides is obvious. It is good enough that humans do not cause trouble for these elves. How could these elves actually take the initiative to launch an attack and provoke a war? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271 The Orc's New Abilities. Chris Redfield opened his eyes promptly that morning, got up, washed, and quickly took care of his personal needs before heading to the mess hall. Good morning, Chris. Good morning, Brock. The two had just met. Since both came from other worlds and had military backgrounds, they had a little more in common than with the others here. How are you feeling? Are you settling in? Well, it's not that easy. Chris knew what Brock Rumlow was asking. He had spent the past month or so at the Winterfell barracks, undergoing various training sessions alongside the soldiers of Winterfell. He'd seen brutal training before, but this was the first time he'd seen such brutal training. In his opinion, under normal circumstances, such training wouldn't produce elite soldiers, only cripples. But what he was experiencing was anything but normal. The Holy Light, this miraculous power, allowed the soldiers of Winterfell to train without worrying about injury or illness, allowing them to fully exploit their potential. Even if they did incur a hidden injury, a Holy Light priest would heal them and they'd be back to full strength and vigor in no time. Chris, who had trained himself to be incredibly strong, though still suffering from numerous hidden injuries, felt like he'd returned to his early 20s after receiving treatment from a Holy Light priest. He felt an indescribable sense of well-being. From then on, Chris settled into the winter barracks, undergoing Winter City's military training. His focus was on Holy Light knowledge and cold weapon combat. He didn't need to learn how to use various firearms, he already had a grasp of modern warfare. His training in Winter City was primarily to strengthen himself to face Albert Wesker. After over a month of training, Chris felt he had gradually adapted to this relentless training method, visibly increasing his potential. He could sense that he had become significantly stronger than before. But Chris wasn't satisfied, he wanted to learn the Holy Light. He knew Leon had mastered the Arcane, a magical power that was more versatile and useful in battle. But as a commander, and having seen so many comrades sacrificed, Chris desired to master the mystical power of the Holy Light himself. What kind of training are you planning today? Same as the last few days, why don't you come with me on a field mission? After confirming Chris had no special plans, Brock Rumlow directly invited him to join him. Just take it as a stroll. You haven't been outside of Winterfell since you got here, have you? Chris gave an awkward smile. And certainly not outside of Winterfell. After arriving in Winterfell, he'd only glanced at Castle Glamorgan and visited Shirley's house before diving headfirst into the barracks. He hadn't even properly explored Winterfell, let alone the areas beyond. What mission? I can't participate in combat missions yet, right? After spending over a month in the Winterfell barracks, Chris had a very clear understanding of the Winter Knight's combat capabilities. The fact that he couldn't yet fully utilize the full power of his Blizzard power armor was revealing enough. Regular rotation at Frostwatch, Brock Rumlow had remained in the barracks since arriving in Winterfell. After all, he was a man with ambitions. Knowing his own strength was insufficient, and with a path to becoming stronger before him, he wouldn't let such an opportunity slip by. After a period of diligent training, Rumlow's combat prowess had reached the standards of a Winter Knight. Coupled with his expertise in special operations and command, his standing within the Winter Army was steadily rising. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, once Brock Rumlow swore his allegiance to David, he too could become a true knight. Are you also participating in this rotation? Chris knew Rumlow's considerable abilities, rapid progress, and mastery of tactical command. Generally, elite troops like him would remain in the city on call, right? Our beloved Earl hasn't yet adjusted the rotation orders for the Winter Knights and the Spartan heavy infantry. In theory, everyone is expected to participate in garrison and patrol duties. Besides that, Rumlow wanted to get out and about. More importantly, Frostwatch was closer to the orcs, and he wanted to see the real conditions on the front lines, perhaps finding an opportunity to make a name for himself. He had always had clear plans for his future, and Rumlow, aspiring to achieve something extraordinary, certainly didn't want to remain in the increasingly comfortable Winter City. Plus, I can try out the new equipment. The Winter Legion's internal equipment upgrade had already begun. The Winter Knights stationed at Frostwatch were now equipped with the latest Piccolo assault rifles. These new rifles are far superior to the Garens we used to use. Chris's face lit up with anticipation as he spoke of the new rifles. If the BSAA had such powerful weapons, what biohazard incidents would be impossible to handle? Even if he remained a mere mortal, Wesker would no longer be an unmatched threat. The thought of this made Chris itchy, so he nodded and accepted Rumlow's invitation to go out with him. And, by the way, see the rest of the world. Chris didn't expect any unexpected events on this trip. Although this place called the Northern Plains still had orcs, elves, and other factions, he had already been briefed on the basics of these two factions during his month-long stay at the Winter Legion. In Chris's view, if the Winter Knights, now equipped with power armor and modern rifles, didn't attack the orcs and elves, the two families would probably just find somewhere to enjoy themselves. There was no way they would come to provoke Winter City. He hadn't expected the orcs to be such a brave race. At dusk on the first day after the handover, a group of orcs appeared southeast of Frostwatch. But that wasn't enough to shock Chris. What astonished him was the power of the green flaming shells fired by the orcs' trebuchets, such an outdated weapon. He watched as a green shell exploded not far away, blasting a huge crater in the ground outside Frostwatch and even damaging a section of the city wall. What fuck? At that moment, Chris noticed that several of the orcs charging Frostwatch had suddenly grown incredibly tall and strong, and a strange green hue had appeared on their bodies. Facing the missile barrage from Frostwatch, they continued to charge forward bravely. Is this the orc you were so easily beating up earlier? Rumlow knew something was amiss. He reported the situation to Winter City while commanding his soldiers to engage. Chris, who had been out just for a stroll, now had a chance to experience Winter City's new equipment. Frostwatch has been attacked by orcs. David received Rumlow's message immediately. The cameras on the Blizzard's power armor also transmitted battlefield footage, allowing Winter City to obtain more accurate information. Gareth has led 20 Winter Knights and 2 Quinjet fighters to provide support. Yes, David looked at the footage Rumlow had captured, carefully observing the green shells and the orcs, radiating green flames and growing larger. Have RC and Nitro Zeus also been dispatched? Yes, David nodded, his fingers tapping on the tabletop. He had a feeling that things might not be that simple. He had just learned that Iron Tree Keep had engaged in a battle with the elves, an attack initiated by the elves, and now he was under attack from the orcs. More crucially, the orcs finally unleashed some special abilities. David doubted there was any connection. How's Stronghold? Stronghold was the front line of the confrontation between Winterfell and the orcs. There was no reason for the orcs to ignore Stronghold and only attack Frostwatch. David suspected the battle at Frostwatch was merely an appetizer, perhaps a distraction. Lightning, Drift, and Smash have already set out to detect the orcs' movements. If the orcs mass their forces to attack Stronghold, they'll be discovered quickly. Indeed, the large orc force was quickly discovered. After all, much of the northern plains offered no cover, making it impossible for the orcs to hide. And the orcs seemed to have no intention of hiding. Lightning and Smash flew back and forth several times, transmitting their footage back to Winterfell. This time, David watched the footage with the Winterfell leaders. Countless orcs gathered in a dense mass, including many huge orcs never seen before. Also, numerous objects glowing green could be seen among the orcs, but their exact nature remained unknown. Fell energy. Lore looked at it for a moment, thinking of a power that also originated from the world of Azeroth. That power was green, very similar to the one seen on the screen. Could it be fell energy? Fell energy generally only exists in the cosmic plane where Azeroth resides, but considering its nature, fell energy represents chaos. Perhaps it's a similar force? So, how did the orcs gain this power? Was it a power bestowed by some god? Without dwelling on the matter, David began mobilizing his troops. First, he mobilized 100 Spartan heavy infantry to garrison Frostwatch. These 100 heavy infantry, aided by several Cybertronian warriors, would ensure its security. All members of the Winter Knights, 500 Spartan heavy infantry, and most of the Cybertronian Legion would march to Snowfort to prepare to confront the Orc army. Chapter 272 Evil Energy? David left 200 Spartan heavy infantrymen to guard Winter City. Although the greatest enemy on the northern plains was the Orcs to the east, the current situation was unique, and David couldn't predict whether the elves to the south would suddenly react and attack Winter City while simultaneously battling Iron Tree Keep. To be on the safe side, David planned to have RC remain in Winter City, with occasional trips south. With these 200 Spartan heavy infantrymen, along with some Autobots under Sheriff Elizabeth Swan's command, Winter City's security was fully guaranteed. I can't believe it. I thought the new year would be peaceful, just watching the population grow. But winter isn't even over yet, and the orcs are welcoming the new year this way. David experienced firsthand what it meant to be quiet, even though the wind wouldn't stop. He simply wanted to farm in peace, but there were always villains trying to disrupt his beautiful and comfortable rural life. Considering that the Kingdom of Tiran had already issued its forced relocation order, perhaps this time they should completely eliminate this evil neighbor, the orcs, and restore peace and tranquility to the northern plains. The order was passed down, and Floyd and Jack Krauser left to prepare for the expedition. Megatron was also selecting suitable warriors to accompany him to Snowforest. David looked at the remaining group, wanting to hear their thoughts and suggestions. However, none of them, including Tony, Jaina, and Sylvanus, had any particular ideas. Only Medivh wanted to visit the front lines, ideally to observe firsthand whether the power the orcs were wielding fell energy. If you collect any samples, bring some back. Tony didn't care about fell energy, he was simply intrigued by the unknown energy he had never encountered. If that power is truly fell energy, then I personally advise you never to study it. Medivh and Tony weren't very close, and their interactions were relatively rare. Even if Tony was interested in esoteric knowledge, he would seek out others he could connect with, or even a beautiful sorceress like Jaina, rather than Medivh. Let's first determine if it's fell energy before we discuss anything else, David said, abruptly ending the conversation. Given Tony's personality, he'd probably get into a heated argument, and Medivh wouldn't be kind to him. A heated exchange between the two was foreseeable. David didn't want his meeting room to become a forum for a quarrel, so he dropped the subject. Seeing no one had any questions, he simply told everyone to get back to their business. While the Winter City army was fully mobilized, it hadn't affected other matters in Winter City. Schools were in session, businesses were open, and with the rising temperatures, farmers were beginning to prepare for the New Year's harvest. This included the freeholders who had long sought land in Winter City. Many had already begun searching for suitable wasteland to cultivate. As a result, Winter City's security, which had been improving, had recently deteriorated, leaving Sheriff Elizabeth so busy that she didn't even attend the meeting. However, the meeting didn't discuss much, simply acknowledging the current situation facing Winterfell. The orcs are invading, and we're going to war. That's all. No one considered the orcs a threat to Winterfell. Even when the orcs unveiled new weapons, they remained steadfast in their belief that they were mere clowns, to be annihilated with a snap of a finger as soon as the Winterfell army reached the front lines. After all, Winterfell's current standard weaponry possessed formidable power. The 500 orcs sent to Snaufell alone could reduce the orcs to an endangered species. And that didn't even include the transformers of the Cybertron Legion. While these orcs, with their special abilities, could withstand Snaufell's conventional forces, they could also deploy unconventional forces if necessary. Led by Lord David, Earl of Glamorgan, they also included Archmage Medivh, Archmage Jaina Proudmoore, and the newly appointed Sorcerer Supreme, the Holy Light Shaman, Steve Rogers. Any one of these individuals acting alone is equivalent to an elite army, so no matter how you look at it, the orcs have no chance of victory. So, Your Excellency, just stay in Winterfell. There's absolutely no need to go to Snaufell yourself. After learning of Winterfell's true strength, Elias Parker no longer believed the orcs could threaten Winterfell. He felt that leaving the war to Gareth Stanton would be enough to deal with the orcs. I'm worried Gareth can't control Megatron. Upon his rebirth, Megatron was imbued with absolute loyalty by David, but otherwise, this new Megatron remained essentially the same. Therefore, he couldn't possibly obey the commands of a human like Gareth. The only person in Winterfell who could command Megatron was David himself. Of course, he had a solution. He could send Optimus Prime along. With Optimus watching over him, Megatron wouldn't cause any trouble. Besides, I want to see up close what the orcs' powers are like. This was the real reason he wanted to go to Snaufell in person. If he could indirectly observe the existence behind them through the orcs' power, that would be even better. Although David felt the probability of this happening was infinitely close to zero. What's the situation at Frostwatch? While they were meeting, Frostwatch was engaged in a battle with the orcs. David estimated the time and found that it had been quite a while since Gareth arrived with reinforcements. The battle should have ended, right? He glanced out the window. Winter City's streetlights kept the city illuminated, but Frostwatch should be completely dark by now. In fact, Frostwatch wasn't dark at all, it was actually quite bright. It was only the surrounding green flames that made the atmosphere seem a little eerie. Gareth Stanton looked at the massive orc corpse, then glanced at Nitrogen Zeus standing nearby. Are you alright? I'm not, you should be able to tell. Nitrogen Zeus was in poor condition, covered in wounds and emitting sparks. What the hell is wrong with this guy? Nitrogen Zeus had seen orcs before, even bullying them in the air, so he didn't take these weaklings seriously. In his excitement, he transformed into human form and charged into the orcs. Suddenly, as the fight progressed, an orc of similar size appeared beside him, radiating green light. Even more horrified, this glowing orc was able to break through his shield. Fortunately, his extensive combat experience, along with the support of his comrades, saved him from being completely slain by this orc. We'll get an ambulance to treat you when we get back. Your spark is also very depleted. RC, now in Cybertronian form, was no longer a compressed human, but rather a normal size. Although the battle was over, RC remained on guard, her goggles still on, constantly monitoring the situation in the distance. Although the orcs have temporarily retreated, I can still detect several energy signals. Don't worry, my lord has mobilized 100 Spartan heavy infantry to take over the defense of Frostwatch. Gareth Stanton maintained constant communication with Winterfell, ensuring he was upfront about Winterfell's decisions and keeping them informed of the battle situation. Gareth Stanton received all of David's orders immediately and learned that the Lord had mobilized most of his forces to move into Snaufell, apparently intending to completely eliminate the orc threat. The first batch of Spartan heavy infantry will arrive shortly to relieve us. Due to Gareth's special status, he couldn't remain at Frostfell's post and wait for the heavy infantry to fully assemble before taking over. Therefore, A group of Spartan heavy infantry would arrive by Quinjet to take over the outpost's defense, allowing Gareth and his men to return to Winterfell. The subsequent heavy infantry would arrive a little later by vehicle. Soon, the first group of heavy infantry to take over defense duties arrived. These Spartans were all clad in Blizzard power armor and armed with a new Piccolo rifle. In fact, the current inventory of Blizzard power armor and the new Piccolo rifles was sufficient for the entire army, so David decided to take advantage of this war to complete the upgrade of his entire army's equipment. Accordingly, 2 additional new ammunition production lines were added to the arsenal to ensure sufficient ammunition for his troops. After issuing a series of instructions and confirming that Gareth had boarded the return flight, David felt that there would be nothing to do today and waited for daybreak to lead his troops to Snowford. Unexpectedly, when Gareth returned to Winterfell, Chris, who had returned with him by Quinjet, brought back something from the battlefield that made David give up his rest. Was this found on an orc? David looked at the object in his hand that looked like an amulet or some kind of pendant. He could sense a chaotic power from it. Is there anything special about that orc? After all, Chris was a police officer, and he had been dealing with biological and chemical weapons for many years. He was particularly good at finding overlooked details in chaotic situations. These orcs are stronger and more brave and fierce in battle. Also, their skin exudes a hint of green. It's increasingly looking like fell energy. Chapter 273 Orcs Must Die. Although it was already midnight, David still sent for Medivh. Of all the people in Winterfell, if anyone had any knowledge of fell energy, it was Medivh. The former guardian of Azeroth could definitely tell whether the energy contained in the unknown object in David's hand was fell energy or not. Medivh arrived quickly. For a mage of his level, sleep was irrelevant. When he had nothing to do, he could meditate instead, not only to restore his energy and physical strength, but also to further hone his mental and magical powers. For powerful mages, studying magic for days or even months without rest was a common practice. Therefore, David's visit at this time would not disturb him. Moreover, Medivh truly wanted to know whether the power wielded by the orcs of this world was fell energy. If it was fell energy, could the orcs of this world be backed by the Burning Legion? How is it? He watched Medivh carefully observe, even releasing arcane energy to envelop the sigil, constantly testing it with arcane energy. Very similar, Medivh observed carefully, finally coming to a conclusion. This chaotic aura is indistinguishable from fell energy, though there are some subtle differences in the details. Whether this was due to the caster causing the subtle difference in energy, or some other reason, Medivh wasn't sure. In his opinion, this green energy, derived from the same principles of chaos, seemed perfectly legitimate to be called fell energy. So, this thing is indeed fell energy. That's generally not a problem. David couldn't help but curl his lips at this answer. It wasn't that he thought fell energy was insurmountable, but rather that fell energy was a force too destructive to the world. This chaotic force naturally destroyed everything. Wherever fell energy ravaged, it would become a chaotic realm, and it would be nearly impossible to recover. The most typical example is the orcs' homeworld, Draenor, known as the Outlands. It was once a beautiful planet, but after the arrival of fell energy, it exploded. In this case, we can't leave these orcs behind. David's words prompted Gareth Stanton, the current military commander of Winterfell, to immediately formulate a battle plan and eliminate the orc threat as quickly as possible. Gareth wouldn't rest tonight. He would gather his men. Troop movements didn't require the commander's personal leadership. Once the orders were passed down, the lower and middle-ranking officers would naturally carry out their duties. He would discuss the matter with several commanders and develop a detailed battle plan. Those familiar with modern firearms warfare, such as Chris Redfield and Brock Rumlow, were also on the meeting list. By this time, David could rest. Even after the army set out at dawn, he could, as Elias suggested, remain at Fort Glamorgan and quietly await news of victory. Are you still going to Snowford? I still want to go and take a look. Otherwise, I'll always feel uneasy. Helen placed freshly brewed hot tea on the table and stood by the window with David, looking out at Winterfell at night. I'll go with you. Helen knew that Laura would definitely stay with David in this situation. Laura was also strong enough to ensure her own safety, even going into battle herself without any risk. Her strength was far inferior, but she felt she should stay with David. Helen had a vague feeling that this war seemed to have some special meaning for David. More than just eliminating an annoying neighbor. Of course. Besides, Pollux and Castor are still in the Spartan heavy infantry. Yes, how about having them stay in Winterfell? No need. Helen didn't think her brothers deserved any special treatment. Treating them as ordinary Spartans was the greatest respect for them. As Spartans, they had no fear of war. Even facing a powerful enemy, they would not be afraid or retreat. That was the true Spartan. Moreover, Winterfell was like a divine kingdom to the Spartans, and David was a supreme god in their eyes. Fighting for Winterfell was like fighting for their own gods, a sentiment shared by even Helen's brothers. They feared neither battle nor death, they worried only about failing to perform well enough and losing their place in the Spartan heavy infantry. What David didn't know was that every time Spartan soldiers were sent to Winterfell, those who were eliminated and sent back to Sparta didn't rejoice in their superior strength and the importance they received back home. They would strive for the next opportunity to return to Winterfell, striving to become true Spartan heavy infantry and stay in Winterfell permanently. Even if they were merely a soldier in Winterfell, they could become generals back in Sparta. If you have time, you should visit Sparta. Father would be delighted if you were willing to go. So far, David had only visited Gwen's home and met Gwen's father. Although Helen didn't say anything outwardly, she harbored a certain amount of envy. Even if David was only visiting the kingdom of Sparta, seeing what that ordinary nation that had gradually come to worship him as its primary god was like, and seeing her father was just a side trip, it was enough to make her happy. After chatting about the customs and people of Sparta, David asked about Helen's training progress. Of the people around him, Helen was the most free on weekdays. She usually stayed in Glamorgan Castle, occasionally helping David make tea and bring him snacks, leaving her with plenty of time to do whatever she wanted. After David had led her through a few dungeon runs and established a basic level of combat prowess, she became one of the most frequent dungeon users. I've already cleared the first 3 maps. Helen, while improving her skills in the dungeons, also studied holy light and arcane knowledge, constantly testing her talents, striving to master some extraordinary powers before completing the normal difficulty level. Don't worry about my safety. I've mastered the use of the Blizzard power armor. More free time meant more opportunities for learning. Helen not only dungeon drilled diligently, but also regularly studied various skills. She mastered the use of both cold and hot weapons, and the operation of the Blizzard power armor. Dungeons were a great training ground, so even if she joined the Order of Winter, she wouldn't be a drag. Are you planning to go to the front lines in power armor? If you want to go there yourself, I can accompany you. This so-called front line didn't mean watching from the walls of Snow Castle, but actually charging into the front lines. Helen's willingness to accompany David on the battlefield reflected more than just her confidence in his abilities. That situation shouldn't happen. David waved his hand. He went to the front lines to confirm the situation and to maintain order, ensuring no accidents would occur. He had recruited a number of talented individuals along the way, so he probably wouldn't have the opportunity to personally take action. The two chatted intermittently until a sliver of white appeared on the horizon, signaling the arrival of morning. Having somehow gained the ability to freely travel to Winter City, Ethan Hunt took some time to adjust to this strange new city. It looked like an ancient town, yet it had comprehensive electricity, water, and sewage systems. The streets were wide and clean, even rivaling those of several well-known modern cities he knew. Transformers, elves, Squirtle, and other creatures that only existed in stories weren't unusual here. He'd seen them countless times in the past few days, just like now. Good morning, Liadrin. Good morning, Ethan. Are you going to discuss business? Yes, going early so you can visit more shops. After greeting the high elf, Ethan suddenly remembered something and asked, by the way, does the cathedral need anything? In Winter City, the cathedral refers to the Cathedral of Light, while the chapel is the chapel in the temple. The term chapel is actually a derogatory term used by the locals of Winter City to mock Raines's chapel. Nothing for now. I'll contact you if I do. What a shame. After learning the common tongue of Brunnian, Ethan began working as a purchasing agent in Winter City, selling useful items like calculators to local shops. He didn't set outrageous prices. He knew that Winter City didn't lack the technology, but simply didn't have the time to produce these small items, which gave him the opportunity to make money. If he really made a killing in Winter City with these things, he wasn't sure how the Earl would react. Ethan liked the atmosphere of Winter City, and the purchasing business offered a more relaxed, less dangerous lifestyle, a welcome change and relaxation for his time as an agent. He didn't want to let his greed ruin all this. He planned to buy his own house in Winter City so he could lie there when he retired. After bidding farewell to Liadrin, Ethan headed straight for the Winter Hotel. Jonah, the owner of the Winter Hotel, was his biggest client, often asking him for help with his purchases. However, today, when he arrived at the winter hotel entrance, he found Jonah standing there, talking to a man with a side-parted hairstyle. Just as he was about to greet Jonah, he was suddenly blocked by a series of military vehicles. The trucks, loaded with soldiers, were approaching from the north and turned east in front of the hotel. At the same time, several fighter jets roared overhead, heading southeast. Chapter 274 Life is precious, safety comes first. Standing on the street, Ethan looked back at the towering walls surrounding Glamorgan Castle, also known as the Winter Fortress. The towering walls, combined with the trucks that continued to pass by, exuded a solemn and menacing aura. He watched silently for a moment, waiting until the trucks had all driven away before crossing the street to the entrance of the Winter Hotel. "Good morning, Ethan." "Good morning, Jonah." Ethan glanced at the young man with parted hair standing next to him, smiled and nodded, greeting him. His professional instincts quickly led him to conclude that this man must be from the same industry. Retracting his gaze, he noticed the man had also scrutinized him. The two exchanged glances and smiled and nodded as a greeting. Leon Kennedy, Ethan Hunt. A simple hello confirmed their acquaintance. Ethan guessed that this Leon Kennedy had also come from another world. As he pondered this, Leon and Jonah began discussing what had happened in Winter City. His interest piqued, and he stood quietly by, listening. Although he hadn't been in Winterfell all that long, Ethan had learned some news. For example, Jonah Mera, the owner of the Winter Inn, had a close relationship with Lara Croft, having once been an adventuring companion. Lara Croft, in turn, was a confidant of Lord David, Earl of Glamorgan. So it wasn't surprising that Jonah knew a lot of information that others didn't. After listening for a while, Ethan realized that while he was happily shopping and experiencing ordinary life, things were not going well around Winterfell. The temperatures had just risen, and winter hadn't even completely passed, when a race called Orcs launched an attack on Winterfell's territory. Not only had they attacked Frostwatch, they had also mobilized a large army to assault Snowforest, Winterfell's most remote fortress. War, Ethan sighed. He hadn't expected to encounter war so soon after arriving in this beautiful city. Did this mean his plans for a peaceful life here were completely dashed? Don't worry, those orcs are no match for Winterfell. Jonah and Ethan were familiar with each other. He'd often asked Ethan to buy seasonings, spatulas, and other utensils. The Winter Knights are incredibly powerful. A veteran, Jonah possessed considerable military knowledge. After witnessing the Winter Knights' combat prowess, he genuinely doubted anyone could threaten Winterfell. Sensing Ethan's lack of conviction, Jonah bluntly stated, "Once you've seen the weapons and equipment used by the Winter Knights or the Spartan heavy infantry, you won't have to worry." Ethan nodded, genuinely intrigued by the Winter Knights and the Spartan heavy infantry. While he knew their names, he had no detailed information about them. Were they cavalry? He hadn't seen any cavalry just now, only a lot of transport trucks. And what about the Spartan heavy infantry? Even as he was thinking this, Ethan felt his stomach rumble in protest. Perhaps he should fill his stomach first, then study the composition of Winterfell's army? Oh, and perhaps he could exchange experiences with his suspected colleague named Leon over breakfast? Or perhaps they would need each other's help in the future. David arrived at Snowfort first in a Quinjet, accompanied by the commanders led by Gareth Stanton. With the arrival of the senior officers, command of Snowfort automatically passed to David, and then everyone entered the war conference room for a meeting. "What's the battle plan?" David looked at Gareth, Brock Rumlow, and Jack Krauser, asking how they had decided to fight. Snowfort's specially converted war conference room was open to the Transformers. Megatron and Shatter, who had previously been in charge of some of Snowfort's affairs, were also present. The Spartan heavy infantry will march out of the city to meet the enemy head-on. Gareth didn't hesitate, presenting the battle plan they had discussed with the Lord. The Cybertron Legion will provide air support. Oh? No Winter Knights. Gareth Stanton usually preferred to use the Winter Knights as the first strike, leveraging their superior combat power and equipment to launch airborne attacks from within or behind the enemy lines, disrupting their formation before the heavy infantry would clear the battlefield from the front. The Winter Knights will serve as a backup. Gareth Stanton believed the Spartan heavy infantry was still powerful enough to hold the advantage in a direct confrontation with the orcs, even if they outnumbered them dozens of times. When they unleash their ultimate attack, the Winter Knights will then move in and join the Cybertronian warriors in taking down these targets. After hearing Gareth Stanton's battle plan, David understood his intentions. This was intended to force the orcs to make the first move, allowing the Winter Knights to then launch a targeted attack. This would minimize the orcs' deadly attacks from causing significant damage to Winterfell. Do you have any suggestions? David primarily consulted Megatron. The Winter Legion's human soldiers generally followed Gareth Stanton's orders, with the Cybertronians being the only exception. I think the Cybertronians could join the battle earlier, perhaps alongside the Spartan heavy infantry. Megatron, eager to prove his abilities to David, and to demonstrate the Decepticons' capabilities, said, Lightning, Drift, Smash, Surfboard, Thundercracker, and Skywarp can stand by in the rear. Megatron had already inquired about the enemy's situation in detail. He had learned from Nitro Zeus that the orcs possessed an ability to enlarge themselves, and that the green energy they wielded, called Fel Energy, could penetrate energy shields. Therefore, he considered these flying units as a backup, targeting the giant orcs that might appear at any moment. He hoped this battle would establish the Cybertron Legion as Winterfell's true ace force, and he didn't want to suffer casualties so easily, even among the Autobots, his former enemies. Besides, the Scorpions should give those orcs a surprise. The Decepticons had a giant mechanical worm, which was incredibly destructive, but its sheer size made it difficult to bring across, so they hadn't brought it this time. However, the Scorpion would suffice. This mass-produced Decepticon was of moderate size, and its underground, surprise attack style made it ideal for creating chaos on the battlefield. Let's fight like this. David fully accepted Megatron's advice, believing that this approach would achieve what everyone wanted. The Spartans gained combat experience and truly matured into Winterfell's core legion. The Winter Knights maintained their ace status, and the Cybertron Legion also proved its capabilities. This strategy also significantly reduces casualties for our side. With timely rescue, a complete and utter annihilation of the enemy without casualties is possible. After all, Sally Whitemane, Rhaenyra Mograine, and Teelan Fordring are also present this time. With these individuals, along with David's personal supervision, the Blizzard Power Armor's defensive capabilities and its built-in first aid system, with integrated vital sign monitoring and automatic injection of healing potions, every soldier should be guaranteed to survive. As for the Transformers' safety, ambulances have arrived at Snow for rest. Even if something were to happen, as long as the spark wasn't completely extinguished, David could rescue them, and even if it were, a trip to Azeroth would be enough to turn them back into Cybertronians in a matter of seconds. While the military commanders prepared for battle, David led Helen and the others up the city walls. From the wall, gazing eastward across the plains, the orc army could already be seen in the distance. The area where the sky and earth met was completely filled with orcs. So many orcs, how did they survive? David, gazing at the vast masses of orcs in the distance, wondered if there was some sort of barracks to the east. Just drop in some ore, money, lumber, or something, and a steady stream of orcs would pour out. This number seemed a bit abnormal. How about sending someone to investigate? Laura wondered, eager to find out. Her inner adventurer was stirring again. How about Peggy, Sylvanus, and go and see what's behind the orcs? David wanted to reject Laura's suggestion outright. Given his personality, investigating an enemy's home base alone, without knowing anything about them, was a terrible idea. But the words stuck in his throat, unable to come out. For some reason, he felt a voice telling him to go and see for himself, and he'd find the answers to many of his questions. After a few seconds of hesitation, David decided, go and see for himself. Without Laura, and certainly not Helen, David planned to go deep into the enemy's territory alone. He reasoned that if he went alone, he would have complete freedom of choice in the event of an enemy or any other threat. While abilities like Holy Light and Cybertronian form might not be invincible, David had every confidence in them for survival. Furthermore, he was a Cybertronian hermit warrior, capable of even transforming into an orc when necessary. Even with these numerous life-saving abilities, David made several further preparations after making his decision. He asked Medivh to bind a passive teleportation spell. If David's life was in danger, it would automatically trigger and teleport him back to Winterfell. He also brought a Hearthstone he had recently received from Varian. Chapter 275, Disguise and Infiltrate. Like storage items, Hearthstones in real Azeroth aren't all that common. They're extremely rare magical items, and even the King of Stormwind couldn't easily acquire many. If David hadn't saved Varian and now tutored his son, Varian wouldn't have given David such a top-tier magical item as a gift, the one he brought when he recently visited Anduin in Winterfell. David had initially assumed he wouldn't need it. After all, he rarely left Winterfell, and when he did, it was to other planes. He wouldn't have much use for a hearthstone. At the time, he'd assumed it would be used more by his subordinates, but he'd been the one to actually retrieve and prepare it. So, never be too absolute about anything. You could be wrong at any moment. After Medivh's adjustments confirmed the Hearthstone's usability in this world, David carefully sorted out his equipment, making sure nothing was missing before setting off again. "Are you going alone?" Steve, having learned of the outbreak of war in Winterfell, came to investigate. "Don't you need my help? If you do, I won't hesitate." David first unloaded all his equipment from his storage bracelet, inspected it one by one, and then put it back. The Hammer of Judgment, the Poseidon Lance, the Light Hunter, and the potent ammunition were all his usual weapons and equipment. It was a shame he hadn't had time to upgrade them yet, as this would have greatly improved his safety. He didn't wear the Lightbringer suit this time. While it offered decent defense and a bonus to Holy Light, the gleaming gold of the shoulder armor was too conspicuous. He wanted to keep a low profile this time. Furthermore, David made no secret of his plan. It had no direct connection to the battle with the orcs outside SYNOPSIS. He was heading to the orc rear. To avoid attracting their attention, he would depart at night and remain invisible. Although he transformed into Tomcat, he often used his Cybertronian form to scan for new technologies. He had already mastered the simple art of optical invisibility. After arranging everything, David summoned the Tomcat, now enhanced with vibranium properties, boarded it, activated the optical invisibility, and took off. The powerful force lifted David to high altitude in the blink of an eye, and he immediately turned south, preparing to fly east along the Tiran Mountains. This route would have been a waste of time if he had been traveling slowly on the ground, but for David in a fighter, it was nothing. He didn't even have the chance to fully enjoy the exhilaration of soaring freely in his fighter before he had already passed the orc army and arrived in the eastern region of the northern plains. This was an area untouched by Winterfell's influence. The nobles of Iron Tree Keep had only briefly ventured into this area before being driven away by the orcs. David didn't know much about this area, but out of curiosity, he flew a little longer to observe the eastern part of the northern plains. He found the terrain unremarkable. To the south lay the Tilan Mountains, completely blocking any chance of the orcs moving south by land. To the north lay numerous hills and small mountains, a complex terrain equally unsuitable for group life. No wonder the orcs were so focused on advancing westward. David also noticed that the area was teeming with orcs. He saw several orc camps, and they were continuously advancing towards SYNOPSIS. Such numbers, meanwhile. Many orcs gathered near several forests, bustling with activity. David spotted numerous trebuchets, the orcs working overtime to craft various weapons. "The only thing to be thankful for is that I only saw trebuchets." After observing for a while, he slightly adjusted his course and continued eastward, soon reaching the easternmost part of the northern plains. "Is it the sea?" A branch of the Tilan Mountain snaked down to the sea, partly plunging directly into the water, forming a natural barrier and creating a safe haven. David realized that this was where the pioneering team had originally established their village. After being conquered by the orcs, they had built it into their main city on the northern plains. Circling and observing for a moment, David noticed that many areas of the city were bustling with activity, each radiating a shimmering fell green glow. Choosing a secluded location well within reach of the orc city, he leaped from the cockpit. The Tomcat rapidly shrank back into his body. In his Cybertronian form, David, like the Winter Knight in his Blizzard power armor, could perform an airborne drop. David, even more formidable, even waited until he was sufficiently low to ensure the hill he had chosen offered shelter before using his back and calf thrusters to slow down. He landed safely on the ground, alerting none of the orcs. Cautiously emerging from behind the hill, David had already located the nearby orcs using various detection devices. He discovered that the orcs operated in small groups, coordinated expertly, allowing for excellent observation and virtually no blind spots. After a brief observation, David realized that he might struggle to kill a sentinel and then infiltrate the city in their stead. Suddenly, he spotted an orc soldier greeting his partner and heading off towards the forest. His exceptional gift for languages began to take effect, allowing him to understand the orc's conversation. "Millard, going hunting again?" "Yes, again for Marcella." "Yeah, Millard, give up. Marcella's body won't get stronger just by eating a few bites of meat." "Temple, Tisk. Am I wrong?" That guy's sister is too skinny to be an orc. She'll probably die soon. Okay, stop talking, it doesn't matter. He can't hear you anyway. The light brown orc named Millard had already entered the forest, while the large, dark brown man named Temple complained a little about Millard, basically about how Millard always went hunting while on patrol or guard duty, causing them to do extra work. After muttering for a while, Temple greeted the last orc, named Sap, and then walked straight towards David. David, still hesitant about whether to charge forward, felt incredibly lucky. This was simply his prey, literally falling right to his doorstep. Crouching in the shadows, he quietly waited for his prey to approach. David didn't rush to strike. He remained invisible, hiding in the shadows until Temple reached a secluded corner and unzipped his pants. Then David slowly approached behind him. The golden spear pierced Temple's body. Shot through the vitals, Temple could only utter a ho sound, staring wide-eyed as he collapsed to the ground. Retracting the spear, David performed his usual gun dance. As the spear swung, a stream of water formed at the tip, cleaning it clean. David then scanned Millard's detailed physical data. No wonder he'd come all this way to hide. Such a large body is a waste. David's hermit warrior mode allowed him to operate in both mechanical and humanoid forms. Actually, the humanoid form is more accurately called a camouflage form. A stealth warrior can scan and identify a camouflage template, allowing them to perform tasks such as disguise, infiltration, assassination, and theft. David had previously set his camouflage form to his natural appearance. After all, back then, he didn't need to employ camouflage or infiltration. This time, he chose to set his camouflage form to the orc he had just scanned. Scan, identify the template, and transform. After transforming into the same appearance as the orc lying on the ground, David briefly took in the taller, stronger physique. After pondering for 2 seconds, he adjusted his body slightly before firing another round of sulfuric acid rounds at a body dumped in the pit and carefully burying it. After completing this, David pretended to have just solved a major problem and returned to his post. After complaining to Millard in Temple's tone, he quietly observed the surroundings with Sap. A moment later, Millard returned from the forest. Back so soon today, lucky, Millard said with a faint smile, holding up his prey. And we got 2, leave 1 for us. Just enough to satisfy our craving. Sap, without a moment's hesitation, took one of the 2 already cooked prey and said, the other one's for Marcella. Millard nodded, put the prey into the bag, and hung it around his waist. Because of the orc's size and the small size of the prey, it was inconspicuous. Perhaps David's scrutiny was too obvious, and Millard seemed to have misunderstood. I can take over your patrol duties for the next few days. Huh? Don't worry, your rations will still be yours. Millard was clearly trying to calm his team at Temple, but David felt Temple was calm and didn't need any comfort. No need. David's original intention was to refuse, to end the conversation, but his response was misunderstood again. I told you, Temple isn't that petty. As a glorious orc warrior, how could he care about such trivial matters? Sap patted Temple's back gently. It's almost time for the handover. Let's go to my place and eat some meat to satisfy our cravings. He didn't give David any chance to refuse, and at the same time, he also stopped Millard from saying, we live nearby anyway. After you finish eating the meat, you can go home and make breakfast for Marcella. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.